Hey everyone, welcome back. Chapters 1101 through 1120 of the previous episode. Left behind in the Black Tortoise Celestial Palace, Qin Mu heals himself using primordial liquid, vastly improving his cultivation. Returning to eternal peace, an intense duel with Butcher pushes Qin Mu to finally enter the path of the knife. He then learns microscopic forging to craft his own evolving Dao sword. After thwarting Mother Earth's possession of Gong Sun Yen, Qin Mu navigates celestial politics and rescues Wei Suifeng's disciple, Yu Chudu. Witnessing mortals suffering under oppressive rule, Qin Mu resolves to slaughter the corrupt ancient gods. If you're able to, please support me on PayPal to help me stay active. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Tales of Hurting Gods audio series. Chapter 1121, The Ancient God of the White Earth Hope Prefecture. Kill a few ancient gods? Yu Chudu got a fright. By the time he had composed himself, Qin Mu had already walked some distance away. He hurriedly caught up and whispered, "Senior uncle, who are you exactly?" The dragon Qilin laughed. "Clearly, he's Celestial Venerable Mu. Didn't you hear Jing Baichuan mention that just now? Cult Master is Celestial Venerable Mu, the Imperial Preceptor of Eternal Peace, and the Cult Master of Heavenly Saint Cult. Have you heard of the Heavenly Saint Cult?" Yu Chudu shook his head blankly and said, "I was born in the 9 prefectures and have never left this place." The dragon Qilin roused his spirits and slowly guided him. "The Heavenly Saint Cult was established by your teacher, the Emperor of Endless Clouds, Wei Suifeng, the great cult master in the earlier years. It has a total of 361 halls, carrying out the path of a saint for common people's everyday use. How do you become a saint? To achieve sainthood, there are 3 requirements: establish a cult, establish ideas in writing, and establish merit. Right now, we are in need of people. Old brother you're the disciple of the Emperor of Endless Clouds, and the Heavenly Saint Cult was founded by him. In that case, you..." One Yu Chudu, this Jade Capital Realm expert, under the enticement of the dragon Qilin, had muddle-headedly joined the Heavenly Saint Cult and agreed to become an elder of discipline. The ancient gods of the 9 prefectures weren't star sovereigns. They didn't have ancestral stars, only ancestral lands. Those 9 ancient gods were born from the sacrificial offerings of the Masters of Creation, who lived there during the ancient primordial era. Their ancestral lands were in the center of the 9 prefectures. Each ancient god had its own birthplace. The ancestral land of the ancient god of the White Earth Hope Prefecture was covered by flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder. Thunderclouds completely covered the mountains, overlapping each other with unfathomable depth. When one approached, they would be deafened by the sound of thunder. There were no creatures living there. Any lifeforms that approached the ancestral land would be killed by lightning. Qin Mu looked into the distance. There were mountains among the thunderclouds, and they were struck by lightning until they became white. On the mountain peaks stood many gods in golden armor, looking extremely imposing. Those gods should be the gods who followed the White Earth ancient god. They constantly clashed their cymbals to create the sound of thunder, bombarding the primordial spirits of those who dared to barge in. In order to maintain their own sense of mystery and sacredness, the ancient gods of the 9 prefectures covered their ancestral lands with thunderclouds. Even those who had just become gods could hardly penetrate the thunderclouds. Therefore, after the divine arts practitioners of the 9 prefectures became gods, they still needed to pass through the test of thunderclouds in order to be able to enter the 9 great ancestral lands to meet the ancient gods of the 9 prefectures and become the god generals under their command. To all living beings in the 9 prefectures, the ancient gods of the 9 prefectures were shrouded in mystery, secretive in their movements. Hence there were many who worshipped them. Qin Mu took Yu Chudu, Yenner, and the dragon Qilin through the thunderclouds. Yu Chudu was shocked that the gods in gold armor that were guarding the thunderclouds appeared not to have seen them. Even if they had walked under their eyelids, they wouldn't be able to see them. Senior uncle is indeed remarkable. This level of consciousness attainment is unheard of. He quietly praised Qin Mu in his heart. They penetrated deep into the thunderclouds. For the first time, Yu Chudu saw the full view of the ancestral land of the White Earth ancient god. Surrounded by mountains and engulfed by the thunderclouds, a giant sacrificial altar covering thousands of miles appeared in front of them. The altar was extremely huge, larger than the sacrificial altar of the spirit energy mutual shift bridge by several folds. No one knew who built it. Between the thunderclaps and the fog surrounding the altar, there were many enormous skeletons facing the altar in a worshipping posture. Millions of skeletons surrounded this large-scale altar, round and round. The huge skeletons were like small mountains, comparable to a giant god. Uchudu walked over to the skeletons and raised his head. He saw hexagon-shaped gemstones embedded in their foreheads, which were still giving off a faint light. The faint light rays flowed from the hearts of those skeletons' brows towards the sacrificial altar. These are the masters of creation, the creators of the white earth ancient god, the dragon Qilin whispered. Uchudu looked at the skeletons with a certain degree of awe. Although the masters of creation weren't more powerful than him, they created the peculiar life form known as an ancient god, which was worthy of respect. The civilization of the ancient primordial era had its own unique charm. They got on the altar and saw many gods and devils on it. They didn't know if they were the descendants of the white earth ancient god or the gods who arrived there. By breaking through the thunderclouds, the white earth ancient god had built a god city on the altar. It was extremely luxurious. The gods of the city lived a life of wanton extravagance, steeped in wine and surrounded by women. Qinmu took Uchudu and the rest through the city and saw leftover sacrifices being imprisoned in cages. They were sacrificial offerings given by the various races of white earth to the half-gods. The sacrifices were slaves from various races, and among them were humans. They were imprisoned in cages, looking panic-stricken. Even more of them were simply numb. They stared blankly ahead, their eyes blinking only after a long time. Disciple nephew, you're a god who grew up here and should be familiar with the history of the 9 prefectures and the 3-pillar heavens, right? Qinmu stopped walking and asked, "Didn't this place go through the revolutions of Dragon Han and Crimson Light?" Uchuda pondered for a while and said, "I heard teacher talk about the revolutions and reforms of the Dragon Han and Crimson Light eras. He also spoke a little about what happened during the High Emperor era. However, this isn't the primordial realm. We are the same as other heavens. Nothing has changed over the last million years. Our ancestors have been living like this for generations." Qinmu was stunned. The Dragon Han Revolution, the Crimson Light Revolution, the High Emperor Reform, and the Founding Emperor Reform were grand and spectacular. However, they hadn't spread beyond the primordial realm to the various heavens of the universe. The lives of the people outside the primordial realm remained the same. They were still enslaved by the ancient gods, and everything was like the early years of the Dragon Han era. They were already numb and accepted the fate of their ancestors, as well as their own fate and the fate of their future generations. Only in the primordial realm had people with lofty ideals emerged endlessly for millions of years, constantly resisting, fighting, and making reforms. Qinmu raised his head and looked at the center of the sacrificial altar. The center of the altar was where the power of the sacrificial offerings converged. A majestic ancient god came into their sight. The entire body of that ancient god was as white as snow. It looked like a white ape with 4 arms, and its body was covered in bulging muscles. There was a vermilion red horn on its head, which was pulling in the power of the sacrificial offerings as he inhaled and exhaled. His body was as big as a mountain, and as he breathed, his corporeal body expanded and contracted. Lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled whenever his muscle moved. Thousands of gods surrounded him, emitting Tao sounds from their mouths to refine his body. There were gods shaking hammers made from white bones. Skulls flew out from those hammers into the prison cages, sucking out the souls of the sacrificial life forms. The skulls returned and danced around the ancient god, spewing out the souls that they siphoned, which were then absorbed into the ancient god's body with each breath he took. The ancient god who ruled the White Earth Hope Prefecture actually trained hard day and night, even more diligently than the post-celestial life forms. He even used the souls of the post-celestial lifeforms to train and was filled with demonic nature. Although it was difficult for the ancient gods to break through the restraints of their body's great Tao, they could continue to explore along the lines of their own great Tao, raising the power of their great Tao to the extreme. Clearly, the White Earth ancient god was one such example. Yennefer was feeling a little uneasy. She reminded Qinmu, saying, "Young master, the power of an ancient god is strong in their ancestral land. Why not lure this ancient god out of this place and kill him outside?" The dragon Qilin was also feeling a little uneasy. The power of this ancient god seems much stronger than the 5 elements star sovereigns back then. Cultmaster, why don't we decide on a plan first? Qin Mu stopped his footsteps. Yenner and the dragon Qilin heaved a sigh of relief. Suddenly, Qin Mu took out the glassy sky pagoda and stabbed it into the ground. Their hearts jumped as they saw Qin Mu bowing towards the glassy sky pagoda, saying solemnly, "I request this treasure evolve into the 28 heavens." The White Earth ancient god took notice when the glassy sky pagoda landed and immediately opened his eyes. The body of the 4-armed white ape suddenly crackled as his muscles bulged. His physique became even larger than before, and was expanding ceaselessly. However, as Qin Mu bowed, the glassy sky pagoda suddenly exploded violently, and its 28 canopies transformed into layers of heavens that constantly expanded outwards. The entire White Earth ancestral land was instantly pulled apart by the 28 heavens. The gods and devils that were circling the ancient god were involuntarily tossed into the sky, landing on the different layers of heavens. The sacrificial altar beneath the ancient god was sent flying away as well, landing far away from him. The moment Qin Mu bowed, he had already charged forward. As the 28 heavens of the glassy sky pagoda shifted their positions, he was instantly brought to the front of the ancient god. He was able to control the glassy sky pagoda simply through his thoughts. This treasure was recognized as the best treasure in the world. From the perspective of Qin Mu, the refining methods of North deity Xianwu weren't that brilliant and could even be considered as simple and crude. They simply smelted treasures together forcefully. This was extremely crude and an eyesore. However, the treasure was worthy of being the world's top treasure because too many treasures had been smelted together by North deity Xianwu. Coupled with the ancient god egg, which made one's wishes come true, there was no other divine weapon in the world that could match up to this treasure. The corporeal body of the White Earth ancient god was still expanding. However, there were 27 heavens between him and his ancestral land, and each of them seemed incomparably vast. He suddenly felt emptied of his power, and a fear that he had never experienced surged in his heart. This is the treasure of North deity Xianwu, the glassy sky pagoda. He was panic-stricken. The glassy sky pagoda was even praised by the ancient celestial emperor as the world's top treasure, possessing unpredictable power. Naturally, he knew of this treasure. Hasn't this treasure been missing for 600,000 years? Why did it appear now? Although he was in a state of confusion, he decisively stopped his corporeal body from expanding and began to shrink it instead. If he had continued to expand his corporeal body without the support of his ancestral land, his body would only appear big and strong on the outside while being weak on the inside. When his corporeal body shrank, his strength was condensed. After painstakingly researching his own great Tao for millions of years, he was utterly convinced that he didn't need to fear anyone. However, in the next moment, Qin Mu appeared in front of him and charged towards him. Qin Mu drew out his sword, which covered the entire sky. Right at that moment, when his corporeal body stopped expanding and had yet to contract, was when his power was at its weakest. Even so, he was calm in the perilous situation. The ancient gods were born into the Tao and had an innate ability to control the great Tao, possessing an advantage that post-celestial lifeforms couldn't match up to. Although the ancient gods couldn't set foot into other realms, as long as he researched his own great Tao, he was convinced that he could rely on his innate advantages and his own perception of his Tao to surpass post-celestial lifeforms and half-gods. In his own Tao, he was supreme and peerless. However, when he saw Qin Mu's sword light, he realized that Qin Mu's sword was charging towards his weakness. No great Tao was perfect, especially those of ancient gods. This was because all of the ancient gods would be summoned by the ancient celestial emperor so that Tao ancestor of the Tao sect could map out their runes of great Tao. Even Heaven Duke and Mother Earth's runes of great Tao were mapped out by Tao ancestor, and the White Earth ancient god was no exception. When he saw Qin Mu's sword light, he knew that Qin Mu's sword skill divine art was directed at his weakness. Without thinking much, he raised and shook his hand. Light rays exploded from the center of his palm as his great Tao boomed. He was convinced that he could crush Qin Mu and his sword skill divine art with his magic power. He raised his 3 other hands, and each had a different mudra. One to kill the corporeal body, one to shake up the primordial spirit, and one to destroy everything Qin Mu had. Those 3 seals were his highest achievements, representing the ultimate skills he had comprehended through his hard work in researching his own Tao for millions of years. His first palm had already clashed with Qin Mu's sword light. As long as he was able to block Qin Mu's sword and smash it into pieces, his second, third, and fourth attacks would land on Qin Mu in succession, pulverizing him. At that moment he saw Qin Mu's sword passing through the 5 fingers of his palm. It was as though Qin Mu didn't encounter any resistance. However, he saw his thumb flying up as half of his palm, along with his other 4 fingers, detached and fell from his hand. Along with the snow-white sword light was Qin Mu's figure. When he saw Qin Mu's face clearly, it scared him.
Celestial Venerable Mu.
The muscles on the ancient god's face began to shake violently. The terrible existence who slaughtered the 5 elements ancient gods in the distant ancient era was back. To him, Celestial Venerable Mu was like a stranger. However, when he heard about his name after Qin Mu killed the 5 elements ancient gods, it got imprinted deeply into his head, like a nightmare that would materialize from time to terrorize him. He had heard of Celestial Venerable Mu a long time ago. However, he had disappeared for 600,000 years and didn't appear again until 10 years ago. Only at that time did he realize that Celestial Venerable Mu was just a young man who had transmigrated to the Dragon Han era through a stroke of luck. He used the appearance of Mu Qing and wasn't very capable. What was more important was that Celestial Venerable Mu no longer had his former ferocious reputation, though he had gained the title of Invincible Great Wizard among the ancient gods. According to legend, as long as Celestial Venerable Mu was safe, the ancient gods could be invincible and immortal. The so-called Invincible Great Wizard meant that he was a powerful magic practitioner who could make the ancient gods invincible. It didn't mean that Qin Mu himself was invincible. The ancient gods rejoiced and thought that they would be able to return to the days of the Dragon Han era, perhaps even returning to the ancient primordial era when ancient gods ruled the world. When the White Earth ancient god heard this rumor, he was very happy. Although he depended on the celestial heavens and white deity of Western Heaven, even maintaining the custom of blood consumption and blood sacrifice, he wasn't free and couldn't be as unrestrained as before. If the ferocious and cruel Celestial Venerable Mu who killed ancient gods back then could become a great benefactor who could make the ancient gods invincible, that would be a good thing. Also, since Celestial Venerable Mu was weak and tiny, controlling him should have been easy. However, Celestial Venerable Mu was there to kill him now. The second Madra missed Qin Mu, as did the third. The fourth Madra arrived behind Qin Mu, giving off a majestic aura. At the same time, light rays burst forth from the horn on his forehead, shining towards Qin Mu. Ding! The light rays landed on top of the sword light, dissipating it and revealing the essence of the broken sword. His fourth attack came from behind Qin Mu. If he didn't dodge, he would be killed by it. A smile flashed on his trembling face as his voice boomed like thunder. Celestial Venerable Mu, hold it. We're natural allies. Before he could finish his words, the broken sword in Qin Mu's hands expanded, transforming into a divine knife that slashed towards his divine horn. The slash split open his hard divine horn as easily as splitting bamboo. The divine horn was sliced in two, flying off from the top of his head. The White Earth ancient god followed up with his fourth attack immediately, which arrived at the back of Qin Mu's heart. At that moment, the divine knife in Qin Mu's hand turned into a long sword, which passed across his forehead. Boom! The fourth attack struck the back of Qin Mu's heart forcefully, and flesh and blood flew all around. Flying along with the flesh and blood was the skull of the White Earth ancient god. His skull flew backward, while Qin Mu's back was almost completely blown away by his attack. His back muscles were completely rotten and were sent flying behind the White Earth ancient god. Just like his skull, Qin Mu looked down and was able to see the ancient god's brain structure clearly. The ancient god was only left with half a brain. The moment Qin Mu lowered his head, his third eye at the heart of his brows opened, and a ray of light penetrated into the remaining half of the White Earth ancient god's brain. The god soul of the ancient god disintegrated. His earth soul tried to escape, but it was too late. Instantly it was pulverized, turning into tumbling black soul sand that dissipated into the air. The glassy sky pagoda retracted, and the 28 heavens turned into the 28 canopies, closing up along the pillar. The gods and devils returned to the vicinity of the sacrificial altar. They hadn't composed themselves, and their eyes were full of confusion. The White Earth ancient god remained seated on the sacrificial altar of the ancestral land. 3 of his palms still had mudras whose powers weren't yet dissipated, while his other palm was only left with half a palm. His smile remained frozen on his face. God Ancestor, what happened? The gods and devils looked around and asked. Only then did they realize that the White Earth ancient god was dead. Qin mobilized his overlord body 3 elixir technique, quickly healing the injuries on his back. He then pulled out the glassy sky pagoda as he turned to leave, saying solemnly, "Let's go to the Black Prefecture in the north to meet the capable Earth ancient god." Behind him, sounds of wailing and crying traveled over 1123 small celestial heavens, great celestial heavens. Yuchudu stumbled after Qin and the others. The scene of Qin killing the White Earth ancient god was still in his head. He was greatly shaken by the earlier scene of the knife light and sword shadow. Back then, when the Emperor of Endless Clouds, Wei Suifeng, subdued the 12 ancient gods, he was shaken, but it wasn't as bad as today. Qin killing of Jing Baichuan also shook him up quite a bit. However, compared to the White Earth ancient god, the killing of the White Earth ancient god was much worse. Yuchudu felt a restless energy running through his body. He couldn't wait to pick up his sword and slash around wildly, wiping out all of the injustices of the world. His senior uncle seemed to have a strange and marvelous energy in his body. It was very contagious and had already infected him, making his blood boil with righteous indignation. "Senior uncle, who are you exactly?" he muttered softly. The dragon Qilin smiled. "Clearly, he's Celestial Venerable Mu, the cult master of the Heavenly Saint cult. You've asked this question before." Yuchudu still wasn't satisfied with that answer. He muttered, "Celestial Venerable Mu. Celestial Venerable Mu." He was, after all, the most highly regarded disciple of the Emperor of Endless Clouds, Wei Suifeng, and his experience and encounters made him calm and cautious. He said, "Senior uncle, you've killed the White Earth ancient god. I'm afraid we'll be exposed. All that the celestial heavens and white deity have to do is interrogate the White Earth ancient god's soul, and they'll be able to find out who killed him. They won't be able to do so," Qin said plainly. "His soul was already scattered. Apart from me, who is able to reconstruct his soul? In this world, there's only one person who could probe the reason for his death. That's me." Yuchudu's eyes widened as he unconsciously stopped walking. The dragon Qilin turned back and smiled. "Elder Yu, please hurry up." Yuchudu hurried forward and said earnestly, "Senior uncle, can you teach me?" Qin glanced back at him puzzledly. Yuchudu quickly explained, "I don't think that teacher's abilities aren't good. It's just that senior uncle's abilities are too strong. I'm greedy and want to learn a little more." Qin laughed heartily and said, "I'm still at the true god realm now. Your master can fight 100 copies of me with just one hand. His abilities are naturally very strong. It's just that he hasn't come into contact with the reform of eternal peace and is thus outdated. However, his achievements will be much greater once he has absorbed the results of eternal peace's reform after I have rescued him. There's no need to learn from me. You only need to go to eternal peace to learn everything I know." Yuchudu revealed a longing expression as he said in anticipation, "Once I have learned the abilities in eternal peace, can I become as strong as senior uncle?" Qin thought about it and shook his head. "Not possible. Although you've mastered your master's abilities very well, you're not creative enough. When I look at your divine arts, it's clear that you've been using your master's abilities without any contributions or modifications. Even if you arrive at eternal peace, you can only rank second or third in eternal peace, even after learning the results of the reform." Yuchudu's face was as black as iron. Qin consoled him, saying, "However, with the results of eternal peace's reform, it would be more than enough to make you an expert in the celestial heavens. Jade Capital Realm existences wouldn't be able to match up to you. If you could combine several different Emperor's Throne techniques to cultivate a small celestial heavens technique, there wouldn't be many disciples of the celestial venerables that could match up to you when battling you on the same realm." "Small celestial heavens technique?" Yuchudu's thoughts wandered far away as he excitedly said, I heard teacher mention that the small celestial heavens technique is an amalgamation of several types of Emperor's Throne techniques. If one could integrate 18 types of Emperor's Throne techniques into one, it would be a great celestial heavens technique. What if I could cultivate the great celestial heavens technique? You would become a celestial venerable. Qin Mu said plainly. Anyone who can comprehend a great celestial heavens technique is qualified to become a celestial venerable. In the Jade Capital realm, you would be invincible and peerless. It wouldn't be easy for celestial venerables to defeat you in the same realm. Yuchudu was ineffably excited, and he balled up his fists tightly. Qin Mu glanced at him and said, "Every time an additional type of technique is added to the amalgamation, its difficulty is doubled. It's already extremely difficult to merge 2 or 3 types. To merge more than 10 types is as difficult as scaling the sky. The disciples of the 10 celestial venerables in the celestial heavens are rare experts, and even so, they can only merge up to 6 or 7 types. There might be someone in the celestial heavens who's able to merge 18 types of techniques in order to make the first step into the great celestial heavens. However, I've yet to come across such a person." Yuchudu's heart went cold as though he had been doused with a basin of cold water. He hurriedly said, "Senior uncle, what about you? How many Emperor's Throne techniques can you merge?" 14 types. Including my unity technique, that would be 15 types. Qin Mu was filled with emotions as he said, "I may seem close to achieving the great celestial heavens technique, but in fact I'm still extremely far away. Ultimately, it's difficult to achieve that. The 10 celestial venerables are remarkable. When they fight me on the same realm, I'm at most stronger than them by a little." He then sighed endlessly. Yuchudu was stunned. If one didn't come into contact with the reform of eternal peace, they wouldn't know how powerful it was. Eternal peace's reform was mobilized by Qin Mu, Su Shanghua Zhang Baigui, Emperor Yanfeng, Emperor Yanxiu Lin Xian, Wang Muran and the rest. Although each person's level of contribution was different, they exchanged their ideas freely and didn't keep to themselves. The foundation of Eternal Peace's reform was the reform of divine treasures. Eternal Peace's divine arts practitioners today cultivated the spirit embryo divine treasure, differently from the celestial heavens. They dove deeply into the study of algebra, planting builder trees in their spirit embryo divine treasures. When cultivated until the 5 elements divine treasure, the builder trees would run through the 5 elements, linking the 5 elements in spirit embryo into one body. It could still be considered as one divine treasure, but its power would be much stronger than cultivating the conventional way. When cultivated until the 6 directions divine treasure, their spirit platforms would transform into 6 directions as their builder trees ran through them. From the beginning until the end, the divine arts practitioners of eternal peace would only have one unified divine treasure even as their realms increased. Be it the control of their vital qi, the power of their divine arts, the strength of their primordial spirits, or the depth of their cultivation, they would surpass the celestial heavens divine arts practitioners who were on the same realm as them by a great deal, even several folds. When they reached the divine bridge divine treasure, the divine arts practitioners of eternal peace would abolish the divine bridge divine treasure and cultivate the celestial river divine treasure. At this stage, no matter how many Emperor's Throne techniques the divine arts practitioners of the celestial heavens cultivated, they wouldn't be able to bridge that terrifying gap. The most brilliant moment of eternal peace's reform was the reform of divine treasures. However, after the celestial palace realm, the builder trees decreased, giving the gods of the celestial heavens a chance to surpass them. The sudden eruption of the calamity of eternal peace was the reason for this situation. At that time, the compassionate and upright men of eternal peace basically entered or were about to enter the celestial palace. Given their personalities, they would definitely carry out a radical reform of the celestial palace realm. However, the calamity of eternal peace erupted. Out of the 3 heroes of reform, Qin Mu got impaired, while eternal peace imperial preceptor and Emperor Yanfeng were thrown into jail. The reform of the celestial palace realm was hence disrupted. Celestial Venerable Yu, who was the most likely to become the pillar of eternal peace's reform, ended up hiding in Yudu. More than a decade had passed since the end of Eternal Peace's calamity. Eternal Peace's reform was now more focused on microscopic forging. Led by Su Shanghua Lin Xian, the 9 elders of disabled elderly village, Ling Yuxiu, and the rest. Although their talents weren't weaker than those of Qin Mu, Zhang Baigui, and Emperor Yanfeng, when it came to making drastic changes in the name of reform, they were a little less open-minded and ambitious. Senior uncle, we've arrived at the ancestral land of the capable earth ancient god, Yu Chudu said. Qin Mu stopped and stood outside the ancestral land of capable earth. The third eye at the heart of his brows opened, and he looked at the ancestral land through the surging sinister earth aura. The evil aura was incomparably dense and prevented the outside world from looking in. However, Qin Mu's eyes had already seen all of the capable earth ancestral land. The capable earth ancient god had the face of a human, the body of a dog, and the feet of a tiger. His mouth was filled with long sharp protruding teeth. Behind him were 9 gigantic green tails. He was making merry on the sacrificial altar, enjoying a dance performance. He was surrounded by many celestial troops and generals and was heavily guarded. Below him, there were heavenly ladies playing drums made from silk and bamboo. Their voices were melodious, and their dance was graceful. Those heavenly ladies had good figures and wore very little clothing, which barely covered their intimate parts. As they danced in front of everyone, their postures were extremely provocative. The capable earth ancient god and a group of god generals laughed with joy. He got excited and raised his wine cup. There wasn't much wine left in his 3-legged bronze cup that was as tall as a man. He reached out and grabbed a heavenly lady who was singing and dancing. He tightened his fist, squeezing the blood out of that heavenly lady and into his cup. He then drank it in one mouthful. That heavenly lady was already dead and was tossed away by him. Qin Mu saw this scene as he looked from outside the capable earth ancestral land. He produced the glassy sky pagoda, took a few steps back and abruptly dashed forward. On the way, he threw the glassy sky pagoda into the capable earth ancestral land. Boom! The speed of the glassy sky pagoda was faster than the speed of sound. Soon it reached a speed of 100 times faster than sound. Its jade pillar dragged a trail of flames into the capable earth ancestral ground as it slowly opened its canopies. Qin Mu was following behind the glassy sky pagoda at a comparable speed. As he charged forward, he lowered his head while his hand pressed against the hilt of his broken sword. Whoosh! 2 streaks of lightning, 1 man and 1 treasure, penetrated the sinister earth aura of the capable earth ancestral land. The gods and devils guarding the North Black Prefecture were killed in a flash before even seeing them. The glassy sky pagoda ran through the various divine palaces and halls and arrived at the sacrificial altar in an instant, pointing directly at the heart of the capable earth ancient god. The capable earth ancient god's reaction was extremely fast. He reached out and immediately grabbed the jade pillar of the glassy sky pagoda, yelling, "Who dares to be so insolent?" The 28 heavens of the glassy sky pagoda opened and expanded out. The capable earth ancient god was shocked to see that his body was lifted high up and sent to the first heaven, far away from his altar. The moment the 28 heavens expanded outside, a sword light flew over. The huge pupils of the capable earth ancient god reflected the sword light as it grew bigger and bigger. It then exploded and transformed into the 33 heavens. His corporeal body was stabbed by the sword as the 33 heavens expanded outwards. No matter how strong his corporeal body was or how much effort he used to mobilize the power of his corporeal body to suppress the sword light, the power of his 33 heavens of the sword path ultimately represented the imprint of Qin Mu's sword techniques on the 33 voids. From his observation of capable earth ancient god's great Tao cultivation, he hadn't comprehended his great Tao up to the level of the 33rd void. His cultivation was extremely strong, his magic power extremely dense, and his comprehension of his own great Tao was unmatched. However, his great Tao was broken, and his comprehension of Tao was inferior to his opponent, causing his corporeal body to be unable to handle the 33 heavens of the sword path. His corporeal body was divided into 34 parts. The 33 parts of his body from bottom to top turned into various heavens with vast mountains and rivers. His head flew up, and together with it was the figure of Qin Mu. His left palm was pressed on the heart of the capable earth ancient god's brows. The celestial rivers viewing of the 4 poles. Around the capable earth ancient god's head, a celestial river emerged, running through the 4 extreme heavens. On the 4 extreme heavens, the great Tao forms of green dragon, white tiger, vermilion bird and black tortoise materialized, combining their strength in one attack, striking deep into his brain. The three souls of the capable earth ancient god shattered, killing him. Yuchudu and the others waited anxiously outside. Qinmu had suddenly abandoned them and broken into the ancestral land of the capable earth ancient god. They couldn't help but be worried. At that moment, a huge head flew out from the sinister earth aura, hitting the ground and tumbling a few times. Let's head over to the next ancient god's ancestral land, Qinmu said in a gentle voice as he walked out of the sinister earth aura. The dragon Qilin quickly caught up with him and hesitated for a moment before saying, Cult Master, you've already killed 2 ancient gods. If you continue to kill them, aren't you afraid of offending Heaven Duke and Earth Count? They are, after all, ancient gods as well. All beings grieve for their own kind. If they realize that you've killed the ancient gods here, they'll inevitably be a little unhappy. Qinmu stopped and said, Can Heaven Duke and Earth Count handle these ancient gods? Either they are unable to control them or they never did. These ancient gods are two-faced. On the one hand, they joined the celestial heavens, enjoying the status and power, feeding on all beings. On the other hand, they want me to make them invincible so that they can overthrow the celestial heavens and return back to the barbaric distant ancient era. I absolutely can't tolerate these kinds of creatures in my camp, the dragon Qilin said. That being said, I don't want this kind of ally, Qinmu coldly said. The Dragon Han revolution failed because the half-gods replaced the ancient gods, and nothing has changed. If even eternal peace allies with these ancient gods and overthrows the celestial heavens, there will be no change. The dragon Qilin hesitated. What if Heaven Duke and Earth Count don't understand this? They need to. They are gods born from the great Tao, different from these gods born from sacrificial worship. Qinmu walked forward saying, After all, the ancient gods born from the great Tao are different from the ancient gods born from sacrificial worship. The ancient gods born from sacrificial worship were originally born with the evil thoughts of the masters of creation of the ancient primordial era, and can never change their ways. Heaven Duke and Earth Count will understand my decision. The dragon Qilin kept quiet. The gods and devils of the White Earth ancestral land were unnerved after the death of the White Earth ancient god, but they quickly calmed down and hurried to the other ancestral lands to inform the remaining 8 ancient gods. At the same time, 3 of the gods and devils flew towards the 3-pillar heavens to inform the ancient gods there. The White Earth Hope Prefecture was located at the center of the 9 prefectures, so the route to the other 8 prefectures was the shortest and the fastest. However, it still took 3 to 5 days to reach the ancestral land of each prefecture. One of the gods rushed to the proper South High Prefecture as swift as the wind, barging into the ancestral land of the High Prefecture ancient god and weeping loudly. Deep Earth ancient god, please help us. The White Earth god ancestor was assassinated. When the Deep Earth ancient god heard those words, he couldn't help but fly into a rage. He slapped his table and bellowed, Who is so bold to kill my sworn brother? That god said, I didn't see clearly. Without any sight or sound, White Earth god ancestor simply died. Useless. The Deep Earth ancient god was enraged. He immediately shouted out an order. Mobilize the great army and head out to the White Earth god prefecture with me to see who this audacious culprit is. After half a day, the great army of gods and devils embarked. The Deep Earth ancient god sat in the center, surrounded by thousands of gods and devils in formation. The Deep Earth ancient god was feeling a little uneasy. He thought to himself, since that person was able to kill White Earth's sworn brother, his abilities are by no means insignificant. If I rush forward, I'll most likely be ambushed by this person. However, I'm protected by my great army, and my battle formations are tight. Even strong practitioners of the Emperor's throne would find it hard to get close. At that moment, the glassy sky pagoda fell from the sky as its 28 heavens expanded, smashing the battle formations into nothingness. After some time, the 28 heavens disappeared, and everything returned to normal. The glassy sky pagoda turned into a blue light, which rose up into the air, disappearing among the white clouds in the sky. The glassy sky pagoda disappeared, and the soldiers all returned to their places, looking as though they had never left. Everyone hurriedly looked at the Deep Earth ancient god and saw that he remained in his seat, motionless. His hands were still holding onto the armrests of his treasure seat tightly. However, his head was gone. On that day, the 9 prefectures descended into chaos. One after another, the news came, sending shockwaves across the 9 prefectures. The capable Earth Ancient God is dead without a complete corpse. The Dawn Earth Ancient God was killed while he was traveling. The Open Earth Ancient God is dead. The White Earth Ancient God was beheaded, and his 3 souls shattered. The Hidden Earth Ancient God was killed in his dreams, without any external injuries. The Flood Earth Ancient God was killed in his ancestral land. The terrible news seemed like it had wings, flying all over the 9 prefectures and the 3-pillar heavens. The gods of the 3-pillar heavens sat upright, their expressions solemn. After they had received the news, they didn't become fidgety like the Deep Earth Ancient God. Rather, they immediately gathered together. Only by doing so did they feel more assured that they wouldn't be killed out of the blue. From this news, it seems that the ancient gods of the 9 prefectures were wiped out. The first pillar ancient god had a solemn expression. He looked like a ghost king with his green face and protruding fangs. He said with a low voice, "Within 5 days, 9 ancient gods from White Earth to Deep Earth were killed. This shows clearly that the fighting wasn't evenly matched. Rather, the killer went around unopposed." Before the other 9 prefecture ancient gods received the news, he had snuck into their ancestral lands and killed them. The second pillar ancient god, with his red face and protruding fangs, frowned and said, "We're already not weak. All these years we've been researching our Tao techniques, and our abilities have become stronger. Broadly speaking, although we aren't on the same level as the 10 celestial venerables, we should be able to match up to strong practitioners of the Emperor's throne. How did those ancient gods of the 9 prefectures die without any resistance?" The third pillar ancient god said, "When I heard the news, I could only deduce one possibility." His gaze flickered as he said, "The top treasure in the world has emerged." As soon as he said this, the other 2 ancient gods fell into shock and revealed incredulous looks. To be able to kill our ancient god sworn brothers of the 9 prefectures so quickly, that would take the world's top treasure, the glassy sky pagoda. And I know the assassin. It's the rumored #1 heavenly master, Dragon Mountain Sanren. The third pillar ancient god said, "I heard a story from the youngest brother of Northern Heaven's Black Deity. Back then when Black Deity, son of Heaven En, separated from the celestial heavens 600,000 years ago, he went to the celestial palace of North Deity Xianwu and met Dragon Mountain Sanren there. Dragon Mountain Sanren used the glassy sky pagoda to defeat the millions of gods and devils of the celestial river navy, causing the #1 heavenly master back then, Shang Pining, to vomit blood after 3 bouts. After that, Shang Pining was depressed and was unable to recover from this setback for the next 10,000 years. Ultimately, Yu Ting replaced him. He fell into a daze and his face revealed a terrified look. When he spoke, his voice was a little hoarse. At that time, Shang Pining controlled military powers such as the Celestial River Navy, the 2 Divine Martial Guards, and the Northern Sect Army. These forces were more than enough to handle Mother Earth. However, Dragon Mountain Sanren, with the help of a few divine arts practitioners, gods, and devils of the Black Tortoise Celestial Palace, killed and destroyed half of these 4 great armies of gods and devils. The other 2 ancient gods couldn't help but reveal looks of fear. The more one knew about the strength of the celestial heavens, the more one would hold the celestial heavens in awe and veneration, not daring to resist. Back then, they were there when the celestial heavens split and knew very well how treacherous the situation was. The celestial heavens had sent its great armies to prevent the 4 deities from leaving. However, they were defeated, and Celestial Venerable Hua was seriously injured by South Deity Zhu Quebec. However, the most terrifying battle took place on top of the Celestial River, where the Black Tortoise Celestial Palace was being intercepted. The military strength of the celestial heavens was severely weakened after that, and didn't recover for a number of years. However, the more impactful matter was the theft of the world's top treasure, the Glassy Sky Pagoda. At that time there were many different versions of the incident circulating among the masses, but few knew the inside story. Back then, after Dragon Mountain Sanren defeated the great army of the celestial heavens, he stole the Glassy Sky Pagoda and disappeared without a trace. The third pillar ancient god said, Son of Heaven was at the Black Tortoise Celestial Palace at the time and thus had a lot of inside information. I only heard about this when Son of Heaven talked about the matter accidentally. There were a total of 8 ancient gods of the Pillar Heavens, which were known as the 8 Pillar Heavens. There were 3 Pillar Heavens in Western Heaven, 4 in Eastern Heaven, and 1 in Northern Heaven. The ancient god of Northern Heaven's Pillar Heaven was the youngest. Because of this battle, Dragon Mountain Sanrin was recognized as the #1 heavenly master. He then disappeared with the glassy sky pagoda and hasn't been seen for 600,000 years. Hence, it became an unsettled case of the Dragon Han era. I didn't expect that the motive of his reappearance would be to come after us, the ancient gods. The 3rd pillar ancient god said, "We can't sit here and wait for our doom." The other 2 ancient gods frowned and said, "Dragon Mountain Sanrin was already so powerful 600,000 years ago, and can only be more powerful now. He has the #1 treasure in the world, the glassy sky pagoda. How can we defeat him? There's only death waiting for us. Maybe he's on his way to kill us now." The 3rd pillar ancient god smiled. "Hence, we should leave while we still can." He got up and said, "Let's abandon our ancestral lands and head over to White Deity of Western Heaven. No matter how powerful that Dragon Mountain Sanrin is, he won't dare to attack White Deity. To abandon our ancestral lands." Those 2 ancient gods were a little reluctant. The 3rd pillar ancient god said, "You'll be killed if you don't. If you leave, you can still survive. What's your decision?" The 2 ancient gods stood up and said in unison, "The ancestral lands aren't as important as our lives. Let's leave." The 3 ancient gods immediately shrank their bodies and flew out of the 3rd pillar heaven. They turned into 3 streams of light that headed straight for White Earth Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge. After 2 days, they arrived at the bridge. After entering the Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge, they came to Western Heaven. Western Heaven was the celestial palace of White Deity. It was extremely grand and imposing, with more than 10 spirit energy mutual shift bridges that led to various places like the Celestial Heavens, Eastern Heaven, Southern Heaven, Northern Heaven, and Mingdu. There were many buildings in the Celestial Palace, so there was no space to build the spirit energy mutual shift bridges inside it. They were erected around the palace instead. The 3 ancient gods arrived and saw that the White Deity Celestial Palace was rather empty. After asking around, they found out that the Celestial Heavens had mobilized White Deity's troops to attack the Great Void. Today, White Deity led the gods and devils of his Celestial Palace towards the Celestial Heavens, planning to reach the Great Void by passing through it. Only Prince Qingzong was around in the Celestial Palace. The Celestial Heavens even mobilized White Deity's troops. Could the Great Void be so difficult to conquer? The 3 ancient gods were surprised and looked at each other. Prince Qingzong may be powerful, but it would still be difficult for him to oppose Dragon Mountain Sanrin. Coupled with the fact that there aren't many troops around, it's not safe for us to remain here. Why don't we head towards the Celestial Heavens from here? The 2nd pillar ancient god said, "I didn't eat much over the last few days of fleeing. I'm so hungry. Why don't we get some food first?" The other 2 ancient gods also felt a little hungry after hearing his words. There are too many rules in the Celestial Heavens, and it's difficult to eat freely there. Let's just get some food here at Prince Qingzong's. The 3 ancient gods flew below the White Deity Celestial Palace. Below it was a vast continent created from the growth soil that the first White Deity borrowed from the Celestial Heavens. On it, there were many beings. However, life was relatively tough. As the 3 ancient gods flew through the air, they saw a city below. Although it was run down, there was still a sizable population. They quickly turned and headed there. When the divine arts practitioners of the city saw those 3 ancient gods descending, they hurriedly armed themselves. However, they got turned into ashes as the 1st pillar ancient god flew past. There weren't many divine arts practitioners in that town to begin with. Now they were only left with common folks. They huddled together and wailed terribly. The 3 ancient gods ate to their heart's content. No matter how those villagers tried, they were unable to escape. An ignorant little girl, looking malnourished and skinny like bones, walked forward unsteadily, holding a bone that was only left with a few shreds of meat on it. She held out the bone and said timidly, "Uncle, eat this, please don't eat us." The 1st pillar ancient god reached out and grabbed her, chuckling as he said, Uncle doesn't eat bones. Uncle only eats people. When he was about to swallow that little girl, a sword light suddenly flashed past. The first pillar ancient god could only look at his broken arm in a daze as divine blood gushed out of his wound. In the next instant, he felt a chill in the heart of his brows as a broken sword stabbed through the back of his head, exiting from the front. The second and third pillar ancient gods were shocked. They heard a loud noise as a gigantic pillar stabbed into the center of the city. Soil flew up into the air as the canopies fluttered in the wind. Dragon Mountain Sanren? The expressions of the two ancient gods changed drastically as they cried out. The dragon Qilin, who was following behind Qinmu, got a shock. There are actually people who can recognize me? Am I so well known? He raised his tail straight up like a flagpole and wiggled it twice. When he appeared as Dragon Mountain Sanren, he didn't have a tail, as he needed to be in human form. Now, in his dragon Qilin form, he could naturally wave his tail. The two ancient gods were so horrified that they didn't care whether their senior brother was dead or alive. Instead, they quickly rose into the air. However, at that moment, the canopies of the glassy sky pagoda expanded as the 28 heavens opened up, separating the two ancient gods. The second pillar ancient god immediately ran, his speed becoming faster and faster. He shook his shoulders, opening up the two bone wings on his back as the membrane on the bones trembled. In a flash, he leaped onto star after star like a flickering shadow. At that moment, he realized that they weren't stars but gigantic treasures. They gave off a dazzling brilliance, like stars hanging in the heavens of the glassy sky pagoda. This is truly the world's #1 treasure. Just as he thought until there, the space around him transformed. In an instant, he found himself in front of Qinmu again. The second pillar ancient god was astonished. He was far away from his ancestral land, and his strength was greatly reduced. He definitely wouldn't be able to defeat Dragon Mountain Sanren, and his death was certain. However, when his gaze landed on Qinmu and the rest, he was stunned. The cultivation of these people isn't high. The highest is that little green sparrow. There's one that's at the Jade Capital realm and another at the True God realm. Could it be that Dragon Mountain Sanren isn't here, and that they're just his disciples? He couldn't help but be excited. If they were just the disciples and followers of Dragon Mountain Sanren, it would be a godsend for him. If the #1 treasure in the world, the glassy sky pagoda, lands in my hands. Instead of retreating, he charged forward towards Qinmu and the rest. At that moment, Qinmu bowed at the glassy sky pagoda and said, "May the treasure offer to the first heaven to eliminate our strong foe." As soon as his voice landed, that ancient god egg high up at the domed roof of the glassy sky pagoda trembled, radiating sounds of great Tao. A majestic force of great Tao gushed from the domed roof and poured into the ancestral court treasures of the first heaven. Instantly, those strange treasures were filled with heart-palpating trembles. World-annihilating light rays contorted the space inside the glassy sky pagoda before exploding in all directions, engulfing the second pillar ancient god. An earth-shattering boom traveled over. The second pillar ancient god's body evaporated on the spot, leaving no corpse or bones. The dragon Qilin and Yenner cheered in unison. Qinmu, however, couldn't help but feel spooked. He raised his head and looked at the ancient god egg at the top of the sky, feeling a little fearful. The life form in the ancient god egg was unimaginably powerful. It granted whatever was requested. Its divine arts were powerful, and so was its strength, giving Qinmu a feeling of even surpassing the celestial venerables. He was afraid that even the divine weapon celestial venerable, you controlled by the celestial venerables, wouldn't be able to match up to it. Qinmu maintained his composure. However, goosebumps popped out on the back of his neck, and cold sweat rolled down. On the other side, the third pillar ancient god was also moving very fast, escaping the various heavens quickly. At that moment, Qinmu bowed again and said solemnly, "May the treasure offer to the 17th heaven to attack this strong foe." A loud and clear Tao sound once again traveled from the ancient god egg at the top of the sky, sounding like melodious large bells and waves of war drums. At the same time, Qinmu's consciousness quietly rose into the sky, trying to probe the mystery of the ancient god egg. This ancient god egg was different from Taishi's egg. When Wei Suifeng split the Taishe egg, the power in the Taishe egg was activated. Various great Tao markings flowed from the egg as the sound of Tao roared. This ancient god egg had no strange phenomena on its outside, so it was difficult to explore what was inside. Only when its power was mobilized was a path for its power to flow out opened up, giving Qinmu the opportunity to sneak his consciousness inside. The various ancestral court treasures of the 17th heaven gave out a bright brilliance, killing the third pillar ancient god. At the same time, Qinmu's consciousness reached the side of the ancient god egg, burrowing into it. Upon entering the egg, he saw a huge primordial gas cloud, vast and boundless. He didn't know what substance it was exactly. It didn't look like egg fluid. Just as he was about to take a closer look, suddenly, the gas cloud turned into a giant bell. On its surface there were birds, beasts, insects, fish, the sun, moon, stars, galaxies, constellations, and all kinds of natural phenomena. When Qinmu was about to take a closer look, the giant bell suddenly vanished and was replaced by a huge ancient-looking cauldron. It sat atop a heavy earth aura, floating up and down, spinning endlessly. There were various relief sculptures of all kinds of ancient gods on its surface, such as gods with three-headed and six-armed forms, gods with the head of a human and the body of a snake, and gods with the head of a cow and the face of a tiger, among many others. Before Qinmu could get a clear look, it disappeared. A bright mirror then emerged. Within it, thousands of worlds appeared, teeming with life and bustling with activity. It was as though the life forms of the universe were going through ceaseless evolution. Suddenly, the bright mirror disappeared. The strange primordial gas cloud swirled again. From its purple air, a lady walked out. She had a peerless face which made people fall in love with her at first sight.
Lang Vo.
Qinmu was stunned. Divine King Lang Vo walked towards him with a smile. She was youthful and quick-witted, gentle and amorous. When Divine King Lang Vo came to his side, her appearance changed, becoming another young lady. She was dressed in white and had a long sword on her back. There were tiny dragon horns on her forehead, and her hair rested on her shoulders, like water flowing down.
BQR.
Qinmu's heart trembled. Bai Chuer walked towards him, her eyes revealing a longing that lasted for 40,000 years. However, her appearance changed again, becoming a young girl whom he had met on the surging river. Ling Yuxiu, who was dressed as a man, appeared in front of him, her eyes full of playfulness and brashness. Among those three women, one was deeply attracted to Qinmu but had forsaken all of her emotions for the sake of her race's future. One was the High Emperor Sword God. Because of her belief that one's life was greater than the heavens, she alone bore the heavy burden of guarding the survivors of the High Emperor era, seeking a path of survival in the dark. It was also because of that night's encounter during the calamity of High Emperor, which resulted in a lifelong misunderstanding, that she waited miserably for Qinmu for 40,000 years. The other was a relationship formed from childhood. However, one of them became an emperor, while the other became an imperial preceptor, so they couldn't be together. The three women all came from the weakness of his Tao heart, created to counter the weakness of his inner heart. Lang Vo wasn't cold anymore. Bai Chuer could forsake everything. Ling Yuxiu could return to how she was in the past. It felt as though if he were willing to stay, he could get what he desired, to be together with those three ladies forever. This isn't real, just an illusion. Qinmu's consciousness was in chaos. Ling Yuxiu had already reached out with her palm and gently touched his consciousness, making it tremble. Celestial Venerable Mu, who shocked and awed the dragon Han and stirred up trouble in the celestial heavens, wasn't a god who was omnipotent and not affected by his feelings. Ultimately, he was a man with a tender heart. His consciousness couldn't help but transform into his figure, feeling the touch of his lover. Ling Yuxiu's face turned into Bai Chuer as she lay on his chest. When she raised her head, her face turned into a youthful Lang Vo, soft and tender like water. You could stay here. There's no need to carry everything on your shoulders. We can be together forever. Her breath smelled like orchids and irises.
Bang!
His consciousness exploded and vanished. He took the initiative to destroy his consciousness, so as to prevent himself from getting mesmerized inside the ancient god egg. When he opened his eyes, he saw the death of the third pillar ancient god. Awesome! Qinmu's eyes moved away from the ancient god egg in the sky as he thought quietly to himself. Although this ancient god hasn't been born, it's able to transform into any form and substance, even any person. If this ancient god was born, it could transform into any of the ancient gods at will, even becoming Heaven Duke, Mother Earth, or Earth Count. It would even possess their powers. That was extremely terrifying. What was even more terrifying was that the ancient god was adept at manipulating the hearts of others. Originally, Qin Mu felt strange that whether it was the dragon Qilin, Wei Suifeng, or himself, whoever interacted with the glassy sky pagoda would be mesmerized by it. It was understandable if the dragon Qilin was mesmerized. But both Qin Mu and Wei Suifeng had experienced the turbulent times of the Dragon Han era, and their Dao hearts were incomparably strong. Even so, they were also mesmerized by the ancient god egg, unconsciously getting infatuated by the treasure. Earlier, when a thread of Qin Mu's consciousness burrowed into the ancient god egg, the weakest part of his Dao heart was exposed in an instant. He almost got mesmerized inside the egg, unable to pull himself away. Moreover, Qin Mu didn't break the blissful and mesmerizing dream state that was created by the ancient god egg to counter the flaws of his Dao heart. He merely wiped out his own thread of consciousness, meaning to say the weakness in Qin Mu's Dao heart remained. As long as he had that weakness, he would continue to be mesmerized by the ancient god egg. That was what terrified him the most. Qin Mu put away the glassy sky pagoda, looking visibly unnerved. "Senior uncle, that little girl is already dead." Yuchudu's voice traveled over. Qin Mu composed himself and put aside the matter of the ancient god egg for the moment. He looked forward and saw that all of the little girl's bones had been crushed by the first pillar ancient god. Her internal organs were completely shattered, and she had already lost her breath for some time. Her hand continued to hold onto the animal bone with little pieces of meat on it. Yuchudu had a sorrowful expression as he said, "This kind of thing happens all the time across the thousands of worlds. Senior uncle, even if you are Celestial Venerable Mu, you can't change this." Teacher himself didn't change all of this either. She can still be saved. Qin Mu stepped forward and squatted down. The creation runes at the tips of his fingers gave off a delicate and faint flickering light, which burrowed into the girl's body. His path of creation had reached a profound level and was at the peak of this era. Soon, the injuries on the girl's corporeal body healed. Qin Mu extended a finger and pressed it gently on her chest. Her heart started beating again as her tiny chest rose and fell. Yuchudu couldn't help but say, "Senior uncle, how terrifying is the divine might of the ancient gods. Her soul has already been scattered. She can't be saved." Qin Mu stood up. The body of this little girl floated in the air as his vital qi surged. He said solemnly, "It can be done. I'm not just the invincible great wizard for ancient gods." He executed the soul guide, helping guide the little girl's broken soul sand as the heavenly door of heaven and earth appeared behind him. He began to borrow the powers of Heaven Duke and Earth Count to help this girl reconstruct her soul. This was the improved version of the divine art of soul reconstruction after another round of modification. The difference was that he replaced the gate of heaven influence with the heavenly door of heaven and earth. Actually, he could revive the little girl solely by his own power, without relying on Heaven Duke and Earth Count. However, he decided he wanted to alert Heaven Duke and Earth Count. It was because he wanted to make his stand clear.
Celestial Venerable Mu.
Heaven Duke's voice traveled over from a high and faraway place, entering his mind, making him the only one who could hear him. Along with his voice, he could even see Heaven Duke situated high up in Xuandu, with his white eyebrows, long beard, and his eyes full of white brilliance. "You want to use my power to revive a mortal?" Heaven Duke didn't reveal any obvious expression as he let out a long voice. "You've killed the ancient gods of the 9 prefectures and 3 pillar heavens. And now you're using our powers to revive a mortal. Are you still the invincible great wizard?" "Heaven Duke, I can't hide what happened here from you. You saw me killing the ancient gods of the 9 prefectures and 3 pillar heavens, but you didn't try to stop me." Qin Mu's consciousness rippled as he spoke to this high and mighty presence. "Today, I want to use your power to reconstruct the soul of this mortal. Will you lend it to me? It's very easy to resurrect her. The power I borrow from you is insignificant. To you, it's just a drop of water in the ocean." Heaven Duke fell silent for some time before saying, "Will you revive the ancient gods of the 9 prefectures and 3 pillar heavens?" "No, I won't." Qin Mu's tone was unusually calm as he slowly said, Heaven Duke, you already knew my answer. I won't revive them. Ancient gods aren't more privileged than mortals. If ancient gods commit evil, I'll also kill them. Whether one is good or bad, who determines that? Heaven Duke said. Isn't the lamb innocent when it's eaten by the wolf? Isn't the grass innocent when it's eaten by the lamb? Ancient gods treating humans as sacrificial offerings. Isn't that the same as wolves eating lambs? Celestial Venerable Mu, when one stands high up on the heavenly Tao and looks down, the good and evil which you just mentioned are often mingled together, difficult to discern one from the other. The heavenly Tao is impartial. It won't determine the wolf as guilty just because it ate the lamb. Likewise, it won't determine the lamb as guilty simply because it ate the grass. Qin Mu said, That's why you're Heaven Duke and I'm not. I'll stand with the humans and only view matters from their perspective. Heaven Duke, you're also not truly impartial. You stand with the ancient gods and view the world from their perspective. You could sit by and watch the ancient gods oppress the world, making all living beings their sacrificial offerings. Moreover, there was some unpleasantness in your heart when I killed these ancient gods. Heaven Duke was silent. Will you lend me your power to revive this little girl? Qin Mu asked again. Heaven Duke again pondered for some time before saying, Celestial Venerable Mu, son of the Qin family, have you ever thought that you can't change everything? The ancient gods are no longer the rulers of heaven and earth and have been replaced by the half-gods. Yet the people are still being oppressed. Even if you kill the ancient gods, you're just letting half-gods take over. When they take over, the living beings in the thousands of worlds and heavens may not be living a better life than now. Qin Mu persisted in his question. Heaven Duke, will you lend me your power to revive this tiny little mortal? Heaven Duke was silent for a long time before he said, I'll lend you my power. However, you can't continue your current way of doing things. You can't continue killing the ancient gods. If news of you killing the 9 prefectures and 3-pillar heaven's ancient gods gets out, it'll result in other ancient gods standing against you, becoming your enemies. Qin Mu said, Should I be smiling and chatting with them, watching idly as they take my people as sacrificial offerings? Heaven Duke, please tell me what I should do. Heaven Duke said, You could stand high up on the heavenly Tao as you look at the living beings treating everyone the same. There's no need for intervention. That's why I'm not Heaven Duke.
Qin Mu laughed.
I'm just a human, an ordinary human. If I became Heaven Duke, I'd be leaving behind my race and not be human anymore. Heaven Duke, actually, you could restrain the ancient gods and prevent them from enjoying the blood sacrifices and lusting after the offerings. Heaven Duke sighed and said, I'll try to restrain them and tell them to give you and your people the respect you deserve. However, I won't force them to do so, as this is contrary to the heavenly Tao.
Qin Mu nodded.
He continued to execute the heavenly door of heaven and earth, feeling out Earth Count's power. Earth Count also felt his divine art and gave him his power. Earth Count, why did you not prevent me from using your power to revive this little mortal? Qin Mu asked. I have killed the ancient gods of the 9 prefectures and 3-pillar heavens, scattering their souls. Being the invincible great wizard of the ancient gods, I haven't revived them. Instead, I'm going to revive an insignificant mortal. Is Earth Count not angry about this? Doesn't Earth Count have any hesitation? Maybe because I was once a human as well. Earth Count said plainly, I was once a Cho and a human, a child of an elderly mother and a husband of a wife. They didn't despise me. After that, I felt that my consciousness that was born from the Tao developed a different type of feeling. His voice was loud and clear, but his tone didn't seem to have any emotions in it. I believe that I was polluted by human nature, and am no longer a pure God born from the Tao. Therefore I can understand you. However, this human nature is also why I can't match up to Heaven Duke. I understand. Qin Mu bowed and continued to execute his divine art, helping the little girl reconstruct her soul. At that moment, Earth Count felt that he lost a tiny amount of power, while Heaven Duke felt that his power remained the same. And that girl had already woken up, slowly opening her eyes. While the dragon Qilin and Yenner were quite familiar with Qin Mu's resurrection divine art, Yuchudu was seeing it for the first time. He couldn't help but be amazed. Qin Mu had summoned and reconstructed her broken soul. Such a divine art was able to go against the laws of heaven. He had seen and known plenty of divine arts, but he had never even heard of the type of divine art that Qin had just displayed. That type of divine art had transcended beyond life and death, and the wheel of reincarnation. Even ancient gods who were born out of the great Tao like Heaven Duke, Earth Count, Heavenly Yin Celestial Empress, and Yuanmu were unable to control Qin fate. Apart from shock, there was also fear in Yuchudu's heart. He felt that that type of divine art would prevent people from dying, which went against the laws of heaven, perverting the Tao of reincarnation. However, while most divine arts in the world followed the great Tao of heaven and earth, there were also divine arts that perverted it. For instance, the path of healing, which healed the wounded and rescued the dying, was also a perversion of the laws of heaven. Another example would be the path of growing, which caused crops and livestock to grow rapidly. Forging and smelting were the same, breaking open the mountains, splitting apart the seas, building bridges in the air, and laying down roads. Weren't those going against the laws of heaven? Moreover, every divine art in the world was full of destructive power, eradicating life and destroying nature. This also went against the laws of heaven, except that people had long gotten used to it and didn't find it strange. Qin divine art, on the other hand, was still unusual and hence shocking. The little girl woke up. She curled up her lips and was about to cry. Yuchudu hurried forward and gently comforted her. Disciple nephew, you can't stay in the celestial heavens or the territories of Western Heaven anymore. Why don't you take her to the primordial realm? Qin said. She's now alone and helpless. It's too dangerous for me to take a little girl with me. Hence I ask you for help. Yuchudu was a little unwilling as he said, Disciple would like to train under senior uncle for a while, broadening my horizons.
Qin laughed heartily.
It's no use being with me. Your teacher's abilities far surpass mine, and his horizons are much higher. Soon I'll be able to rescue him. When that happens, you can be reunited with him. That's when your horizons will be broadened. It's no fun being with teacher, it's not stimulating enough, Yuchudu muttered softly. Stimulating. Qin had a strange expression as he thought to himself. Going forward, there will be times that you'll be stimulated to the point of even nearing death. Yuchudu also knew that he was of great importance to the celestial heavens. Wei Suifeng was unorthodox and clever. He was able to barge into the great void and traverse through the crumbling void by creating a way to shield himself from the heart devils. Only an extraordinary talent like Wei Suifeng could create such a technique. Yuchudu was Wei Suifeng's most capable disciple, and he taught him all of his abilities. The celestial heavens would do anything to have that technique. When you're at eternal peace, there will be someone who will be able to track you down and lure away your soul. Qin took out the life and death book and took several glances at Yuchudu. He then said, That person is son of Heaven Yin. I'll help remove your name from the life and death book, so that he won't be able to find you. He erased Yuchudu's name from the life and death book, saying, It could be as long as 5 years or as short as 2 years before I rescue your teacher from the ghost ship. You can then be reunited with your teacher again. When you're at eternal peace, make sure you study earnestly. You must also understand what you have absorbed and create your own path, striving to improve from third rate to second rate. Yuchudu had a solemn expression as he bowed to express his thanks. He held the hand of the little girl and said, Disciple will closely follow the guidance that senior uncle has given me. Qin bent down to look at the little girl and smiled. Little girl, what's your name? The little girl was still clutching the animal bone tightly in her hand. There were some stains on her face as she said timidly, Hua Xuanxiu. Uncle, please eat this. She placed the animal bone, which had been gnawed until it only had a few tiny pieces of shredded meat left, in front of Qin. Qin accepted it and laughed. Hua Xuanxiu, what a nice name. Do you know that after coming back to life, your 3 souls and 7 spirits have been strengthened by my divine art? Even divine arts practitioners of the 6 directions realm aren't your match. On top of that, I'll give you a bigger bone. He reached out and retrieved the thigh bone of the 2nd pillar ancient god. He removed the flesh and spent some time tempering and suppressing the terrifying power contained in the bone. He then placed the bone into her hands and smiled. This can protect you. Hua Xuanxiu grabbed the enormous thigh bone tightly and examined it. She was a little disappointed. Uncle, there's no meat on it. This is meant for dogs. Dogs are unable to chew it. Qin laughed heartily and waved. Worthy nephew, take her and be on your way. You chewed about again. He then held Hua Xuanxiu's hand and left. Qin threw the animal bone that Hua Xuanxiu gave him to the dragon Qilin. The dragon Qilin opened his mouth to catch it and immediately spit it out, saying resentfully, I'm a vegetarian. Cultmaster, where are we going next? Qin started to walk off as he said, let's head to the White Deity Celestial Palace and transit to Southern Heaven, Northern Heaven, and Eastern Heaven to take a look. The dragon Qilin quickly followed him together with Yenner. He then probed, are we going to kill the ancient gods of the other heavens? If all of the ancient gods of the 4 great heavens are dead, it'll result in a massive upheaval. We're only going there to visit, simply taking a look. Qin gaze flickered and said, I want to go to those worlds to see how the people live there. I don't necessarily have to lay my hands on the ancient gods. He laughed. Actually, aren't the half-gods just another batch of ancient gods? So what if I can kill all of the incorrigibly obstinate ancient gods? Even if the ancient gods are gone, there will be batches and batches of half-gods to kill, never ending. The dragon Qilin pondered and asked, in that case, how can we change all this? We still need to self-strengthen. The human race needs to strengthen itself, and so do the post-celestial races. Qin thought for a while and said, when humans are stronger, they'll no longer need to fear the half-gods and will be able to resist them. Moreover, only when they are stronger will they be able to push for change and become gods for the masses. This is the reason Eternal Peace's reform is essential. When you encounter an unjust situation, dealing with it with force is akin to making a small fuss. What I really want to do. He looked at the White Deity Celestial Palace, which was getting closer and closer, and said plainly, what I really want to do is push Eternal Peace's reform to all corners of the universe and the great heavens, breaking the gods in people's hearts. The Dragon Han era failed to achieve this, as did the Crimson Light era, High Emperor era, and Founding Emperor era. But Eternal Peace might be able to do it. He let out a long sigh. While I travel to the 4 great heavens, I can make use of the time to calm down, research and comprehend Celestial Venerable Ling's letter, rescue Big Senior Brother, and rescue the feathered forest guards on the ghost ship. What's even more critical is, he didn't continue on. He had to understand the great Tao of the 2 yet-to-be-born ancient gods in the Glassy Sky Pagoda's egg and the egg of Tai Shur. He had a very bad feeling about those 2 ancient gods, especially in his Qin word land, where the 2 ancient gods were communicating with each other. However, when his consciousness entered the Qin word land, they would stop immediately. That was simply too bewildering. If those 2 existences that were comparable to the ancient celestial emperor were born, what terrible storm would they stir up? He needed to understand what they were communicating about, their thoughts and their great das. In the White Deity Celestial Palace, Prince Qingzong was in a terrible position. There was news from the 9 prefectures that the 9 ancient gods were killed, and their murderer was unknown. The 3-pillar heaven's ancient gods had also vanished without a trace. White Deity had just led the army out of Western Heaven, and now such a big event had happened. When White Deity returned, he would definitely reprimand him severely for his ineptness. Whether he could still be a prince was now in question. Your Highness, there's news from the 9 prefectures that the Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge that links the 9 prefectures to the celestial heavens was destroyed. The disciple of Celestial Venerable Hao Beta Seti Star Sovereign Jing Baichuan was found dead in the Endless Clouds Palace. The God General that reported the news hesitated a while before continuing. He said, the gods and devils that were with him were all killed, and the disciples of the Emperor of Endless Clouds have disappeared without a trace. Jing Baichuan is dead? Prince Qingzong felt like his head almost exploded. He said angrily, who can tell me what happened in the 9 prefectures? Why is there such a big mess? Where are the 3-pillar heaven's ancient gods? The God General shook his head and said, there were no traces of the 3-pillar ancient gods. However, the god that guards the Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge said that he saw the 3-pillar heaven's ancient gods entering the bridge towards our White Deity Celestial Palace. At that moment, a god quickly came forward to report, Your Highness, we have investigated the turbulence in the lower bound. The three-pillar heaven's ancient gods arrived at the white deity's celestial palace and secretly descended to the villages in the lower bound to consume the humans there. Those three bastards don't understand the gravity of the situation. Prince Qingzong flew into a rage. He slapped his table and shouted, "With all these things happening, they even came to my territories to eat people. Call them up. I want to ask them who's behind the massacre in the 9 prefectures." The god hesitated before saying, "They're dead." Prince Qingzong's anger was immediately dispelled by that piece of news. He fell back into his treasure seat and muttered, "Dead?" The god said, "The three-pillar heaven's ancient gods were found dead outside a city." According to the god responsible for supervising the lower bound, he saw countless heavens expanding outwards, with a heaven ball hanging at the top of the heavens. They were filled with plenty of treasures, like stars across a starry sky, bombarding and killing the three-pillar heaven's ancient gods. Prince Qingzong had never heard of such a treasure. He shook his head and said dejectedly, "Father has ordered me to guard western heaven since the celestial heavens mobilized him to attack the great void. Black deity, green deity, and red deity have also been mobilized. The celestial heavens will also send out the 10 guards and various great armies. Now we have this on our hands. The deaths of 12 ancient gods in western heaven isn't a trivial matter. I'm unable to hide this." His headache was so bad that he could feel his head splitting open. The god said with some hesitation, "Your Highness, should we report this to the celestial heavens?" "Yes, we need to. There's no way we can hide this." Prince Qingzong said resolutely, "Request the divine constable camp of the celestial heavens to investigate who is responsible for this. Also, immediately seal up all of the spirit energy mutual shift bridges within our territories. The killer is still in western heaven and hasn't left. We must absolutely keep him in western heaven." The god was about to leave when Prince Qingzong suddenly called out to him, saying, "Also immediately notify all of the ancient gods in western heaven to quickly set off for the white deity celestial palace." The god left hurriedly. The person who killed the 12 ancient gods must be extremely powerful. Also, the dozens of heavens should be a type of formidable treasure. With the guards of the white deity celestial palace and the dozens of ancient gods of western heaven, the culprit shouldn't be able to barge into the white deity celestial palace. Prince Qingzong paced around, gritting his teeth forcefully as he turned and walked outside. He thought to himself, "I have to personally check the place where the three-pillar heaven's ancient gods died, to see if there are any clues left behind." However, he was also cautious. He summoned 100 gods and devils who were considered experts in western heaven to escort him. Prince Qingzong took off his robe and put on a guard uniform. He then hurriedly left the white deity celestial palace with the rest of his men. Just as he stepped out of the southern heavenly gate, he stumbled across a young man with a dragon chelan not far away, walking as they arrived at the spirit energy mutual shift bridge. There was also a chubby green sparrow standing on top of that dragon chelan's head. The god that was guarding the spirit energy mutual shift bridge had already sealed the bridge. However, he looked as though he didn't see them as they walked up onto the sacrificial altar. Prince Qingzong was amazed, and his heart trembled slightly. At the same time, he saw a strange tiny creature burrowing out of the dragon chelan's ear. It looked like Earth Count except that it was far smaller. The tiny Earth Count stood by the ear hole of the dragon chelan, stretching lazily as it yawned a few times. Suddenly it saw Prince Qingzong and quickly shouted, "Ah!" The dragon chelan and young man turned back and happened to meet the eyes of Prince Qingzong. Prince Qingzong didn't know what to do. He bellowed in rage as 8 huge flags furled on his back, flapping loudly against the wind. He executed the blood rust flag scripture. At the same time, his gaze made contact with the young man's eyes. A great expert of the numinous sky realm. No wonder he wasn't hypnotized by my consciousness. The young man's voice sounded very close to Prince Qingzong, but it was getting further and further away. Prince Qingzong's consciousness got a little hazy, and he looked to be in a daze. My consciousness attainments aren't high enough. If I could reach Divine King Gongyun's level, I wouldn't be spotted by him. However, since I've noticed him, I can use my spells to deal with him. The voice became more and more blurred, and Prince Qingzong felt that his thoughts were slowly stiffening. It was as if they were gradually transforming into pieces of wood. His memory of the young man was gradually disappearing. He only heard a melodious song traveling over, its meaning obscure. When a game of chess is profound and marvelous, one game can be played over the span of several springs. Emerging as an invincible expert, be lenient wherever it's possible. When the singing stopped, Prince Qingzong shook his head immediately, waking up from his daze. He looked confusedly at the spirit energy mutual shift bridge, and then at himself. Why would I execute the blood rust flag scripture as though I was about to meet a great enemy? I must have been too nervous. He couldn't help but laugh, dispelling the blood rust flag scripture as he shouted, "Soldier over there, immediately seal up the spirit energy mutual shift bridge." The soldier that was guarding the spirit energy mutual shift bridge immediately roused his spirits and sealed up the bridge. Suddenly, the other spirit energy mutual shift bridge lit up, and the god whom he had just dispatched returned with several ancient gods. Prince Qingzong was shocked. "So fast." The god bowed and said, "Your Highness, I've been gone for 10 days. Luckily, I was able to complete my mission." 10 days. Prince Qingzong was in a daze as he stared at him blankly. He then cried, "How many days have you been away?" The god was a little confused but still answered his question. "It has already been 10 days. 10 days, 10 days. Prince Qingzong shuddered a few times as intense fear gradually took over his heart. He was sure that he had just arrived outside the celestial palace and was momentarily distracted. Instead, 10 days had already passed. If he had come under a spell, the guards following him would be under the same spell. How terrifying it was to have so many of his gods and devils stand there with him for 10 days. As he fell into a daze again, a hazy voice sang in his mind once more. Prince Qingzong followed along, singing softly. Emerging as an invincible expert, be lenient wherever it's possible. Be lenient wherever it's possible. Return back to the palace. With a huge wave of his hand, he shouted, "Gather all my troops to guard the White Deity Celestial Palace and wait for the Celestial Heaven's Divine Constable camp to arrive. Until White Deity returns, stop using human sacrifices." Northern Heaven was the territory of Son of Heaven Yin, with him residing in Mingdu. The gigantic landmass was created from a piece of Earth Count's horn, similar to Qin Mu's Qin word land. However, apart from Earth Count's horn, there was also the Netherworld Sea. It was a treasure refined by Son of Heaven Yin. The majestic Netherworld Sea wasn't smaller than the Mingdu continent. Outside Mingdu were star regions formed by 40 star constellations, with numerous heavens floating among this vast universe. That day, Son of Heaven Yin had also led the great army of Mingdu towards the celestial heavens, preparing to attack the Great Void. The 4 great sects had suffered a huge defeat in the Great Void, and the 10 celestial venerables were angered. This time they had mobilized the powers of Son of Heaven Yin and the rest of the 4 deities, preparing to level the Great Void in one blow. Qin Mu traveled through Mingdu and saw that the architecture of its celestial palace looked extremely strange and sinister. The murals and statues on the palace wall were either ghosts and ghost kings of Yudu or images of various devil gods. There were even totems of Mahakala. However, what numbered the most were statues, totems, wall murals, and relief sculptures of Earth Count. Ah! The tiny Earth Count peeked out from the dragon Qilint's ear, examining those murals and relief sculptures confusedly, not understanding why Son of Heaven Yin was so into worshipping him. Yenner took him out. She placed him on the dragon Qilint's head and gave him a spirit pill as a reward. After all, he was the one who spotted Prince Qingzong. Hence he deserved a reward. Qin Mu surveyed his surroundings. Son of Heaven Yin had taken away most of Mingdu's military force. There weren't many left who were able to threaten Qin Mu. Son of Heaven Yin is definitely a fanatical admirer of Earth Count. Qin Mu thought to himself secretly as he looked at the Earth Count statues. He traveled from Mingdu to the star constellation of Shangli Palace and entered a heaven, observing the lives of the people as he consulted Celestial Venerable Ling's letter. He looked around and found that the people there weren't much better off than those in Western Heaven. Although Son of Heaven Yin was a great deity of the human race who controlled souls and was Earth Count's equal, humans continued to be the lowest rung of society in his territories, serving as sacrificial offerings for ancient gods and half-gods. The people were struggling to survive. From time to time they would face dangers such as floods and fierce beasts. Not only that, But they also had to face exploitation by the divine arts practitioners of the half-gods and the pettiness of the devil gods. If sacrifices were made irregularly, the devil gods would bestow disasters upon them. Qin Mu saw that many temples were filled with an endless stream of people offering incense. Perhaps it wasn't incense. Rather, people from nearby towns had prepared livestock like cows and sheep or boys and girls to be sacrificed to the high and mighty devil gods. When incense was lit, devil gods would ride on their devil chi and descend to enjoy the sacrificial offerings. When he passed the huge river in that heaven, he also saw the villagers putting young girls on rafts, letting the current take them down the river. Those were sacrificial offerings for the river god. After eating the girls, he wouldn't cause a great flood to drown the villages on both sides of the river. He even saw villagers throwing boys and girls into a volcano. Within it lived a mountain god. If they didn't submit their offerings, the mountain god would be angered, causing the volcano to erupt, covering the land around it with flames up to 1,000 miles away, burning countless people alive. Qin Mu reached the most prosperous place in the heaven, and saw countless divine arts practitioners being used as slaves in mines. Their primordial spirits were penetrated by some kind of soul spell. The gods that stood high above held whips in their hands as they supervised the slaves. If they were a little careless, the whips would come cracking down, beating their souls until they wailed tragically. Son of Heaven Yin had the same bloodline as Celestial Venerable Hao. Although Celestial Venerable Hao was half human, he never regarded himself as human. Similarly, although Son of Heaven Yin was human, he didn't regard himself as human. Qin Mu felt a great amount of sorrow in his heart. Sometimes the cruelest to the humans wasn't necessarily the half-gods, but humans themselves. Qin Mu was unable to stand the sight before him anymore. He originally wanted to see the outside world, beyond the celestial heavens and the primordial realm. However, the more he saw, the more unbearable it got. He wanted to start a massacre, but it was difficult to change anything with just him alone. Celestial Venerable Hua, what are you trying to change? He couldn't help but laugh. Today, the celestial heavens had so many elites of the human race that Celestial Venerable Shao didn't have to mind him for the time being. However, Celestial Venerable Hua was a Celestial Venerable of the human race through and through. Celestial Venerable Hua, Son of Heaven Yin Dao Ancestor Brahma Buddha, Heavenly Master by Yujing, their abilities weren't weak. Apart from them, there were also existences like Founding Emperor. Nevertheless, humans continued to live in the lowest rung of society. Celestial Venerable Hua always portrayed himself as a noble person. Qin Mu wanted to go over to Celestial Venerable Hua's area to have a look, to see how the humans under him lived. He left the heavens in the north and headed towards the heavens in the south. Southern heaven was under the jurisdiction of Red Deity Qi Shiyu. In name she was the ruler. However, it was actually Celestial Venerable Hua who ruled southern heaven. Every generation of Red Deity was a puppet supported by Celestial Venerable Hua. Since the ancient times, many had been known as Red Deity, but actual power resided with him. It was precisely because Celestial Venerable Hua was the actual ruler of southern heaven that resulted in the grudge between him and South Deity Zhu Quebec. South Deity Zhu Ke ruled the South Pole at the edge of the universe, close to the border of the heavens in the south. Her territories weren't considered significant. Even so, Celestial Venerable Hua had spent thousands of years infiltrating the South Pole, resulting in South Deity Zhu Ke not having any troops to defend herself when Celestial Venerable Hua attacked with the divine weapon Celestial Venerable Yu. Qin Mu walked out of the Red Deity Celestial Palace's Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge and looked around. He saw plenty of heavens in the south, with the Red Deity Celestial Palace at the center. They hung in the sky like shining red stars of different sizes, looking extremely dazzling. Qin Mu didn't directly enter the Red Deity Celestial Palace, roaming around instead. He saw the people of southern heaven continent living and working happily in peace, and everything seemed orderly. A colorful phoenix flew across the sky, making a clear chirping sound like a singing bird. Qin Mu walked to the edge of the water and saw a divine dragon lurking in the mountain stream. It lay coiled beneath the clear water as it opened its mouth to spit out a dragon bead which took in the essence of the sun and moon. A sweeping sound came from the mountain forest. A Qilin walked out of the forest and came to the mountain stream to drink. After taking a glance at them from afar, it continued to lower its head to drink. Right next to this mountain stream lived more than a dozen families. There was even a private school, where loud and clear sounds of reading could be heard. Qin was shocked. He listened carefully. The ruler guides the subject, the father guides the son, the husband guides the wife. These are the three cardinal guides. Qin frowned as he thought, this is to teach humans not to rebel. He was about to leave this small mountain village, but he suddenly stopped when he heard some funeral music. There was a funeral procession belonging to an old man from the village. The villagers were carrying an uncovered coffin. On it sat an old man who was bowing with folded hands at the surrounding villagers. He smiled and said, "Today I'm going to rise up to heaven to serve the gods. There's no need to be sad." Qin didn't understand the custom and thus stopped to observe. The villagers played gongs and drums as they carried the coffin out of the village. They walked over 10 miles to a temple. The Taoists guarding the place hurriedly opened the door, allowing the funeral procession to enter. The drums were deafening. The villagers placed the old man and the coffin in front of the god statue in the hall, then lit up some incense sticks before dispersing. Qin, the dragon Qilan, and Yenner stood outside and watched. After a while, a ray of light descended from the sky and landed in front of the god statue, transforming into a god with the head of a bird and the body of a human. The old man in the coffin wasn't afraid. He bowed and said, "Your humble mountain villager greets Mountain Godly." The bird-headed god examined him from head to toe and said, "How old are you this year?" "Mountain Godly, I'm 60 this year." Mountain Godly said, "It's rare for people to live until 60. You must be quite remarkable to live until this age." The old man beamed and said, "Whoever lives to 60 has to come forth to serve the mountain god in accordance with the rules. I've lived long enough to see my grandchildren and have no regrets." Mountain Godly nodded and said respectfully, "In that case, can I eat you?" "Please," the old man said with delight. Mountain Godly opened his beak and picked up the old man, raising his head and swallowing him completely. After, he flapped his wings, transforming into a beam of red light and disappearing into the distance. Qin was stunned. When he watched the god and the old man engage in small talk, he had really believed that there was such a rule that one was to serve the mountain god when they were of old age. Thus he wasn't able to stop him in time. He followed behind Mountain Godly. Mountain Godly had flown for several thousand miles before he retracted his wings and landed at a divine mountain. He turned his head around abruptly, and only then did he notice Qin. He hurriedly exclaimed, "Senior brother, I pay my respects to you." Qin nodded his head gently. "Mountain Godly, I watched you eat someone just now, yet he seemed to have enjoyed your conversation with him. What's the reason behind this?" Mountain Godly laughed. "Is senior brother a foreigner? No wonder you are unaware of the rules here. Our heavens of the south are a place of civility and etiquette. It's where celestial venerable Hua teaches. The gods of southern heaven live in harmony and peace with the tens of thousands of races in the world. The mortals ask for things from us, such as good weather and plentiful harvests, but we also need to eat. Thus a rule like this was set. Any normal mortal who has reached the age of 60 will be considered a dead man, and will be required to go to the temple and become an offering to the gods." Qin questioned, "This was laid down by celestial venerable Hua?" Mountain Godly replied, "Yes. Southern heaven is a land of civility. We are unlike western heaven and northern heaven. They are so barbaric. We are also better off than eastern heaven." Qin questioned again, "What about divine arts practitioners? Human divine arts practitioners can live for up to 800 years. If a divine arts practitioner fails to become a god after 700 years, he has to enter the temple to worship the gods." Mountain Godly smiled and said, "If one becomes a god, they become our equal and our brother. It's just that there are few divine arts practitioners in my territory, so I can only eat them once every half a year. Brother, you come at an inopportune time. There are no divine arts practitioners that are 700 years old now, else I would have invited you to feast on them with me." Qin frowned and said, "The whole southern heaven follows such a rule?" Mountain Godly said, "Yes. Look at this place. It's all peaceful. Humans and gods coexist peacefully. Half-gods and post-celestial lifeforms don't fight either. Isn't it pure?"
Qin vaguely smiled.
Why would there be the consumption of humans in a pure land? This act of getting humans to die voluntarily by Celestial Venerable was cruel and brutal. Mountain Godly said solemnly, "Brother, it's wrong for you to say that. We are reasonable. We asked them beforehand about eating them." Chinmu asked, "What if that man said no? Do you not eat them if they reject?" Mountain Godly smiled and said, "Brother, your naivete makes you cute. It's merely a formality to ask. We eat them even if we get rejected." The dragon Qilin couldn't help but ask, "What about human gods? Will human gods tolerate you eating their people?" Mountain Godly smiled and said, "Brother, human gods aren't humans. How high up are gods? Wouldn't one become a laughing stock if others knew that they still thought of themselves as a human after becoming a god? Divine arts practitioners train hard for their entire life to become a god high up. If you told human gods that they were still humans, they would be angry and curse at you." Chinmu's murderous intent was triggered before dissipating instantly. It was the case of Southern Heaven. Killing Mountain Godly wouldn't make a difference. Killing Mountain Godly would instead cause disasters to strike the place he guarded, causing more to die. The pure land that Celestial Venerable Hua created. Heh. He led the dragon Qilin and Yenner to leave while Mountain Godly watched. He frowned and said, "What a weird person that lacks manners. Barbaric outsider." Chinmu's tour of Southern Heaven led him to conclude that the place was merely an orderly yet primal society. Humans slashed and burned while divine arts practitioners stayed secluded in the mountains, refusing to help normal humans. Yet human gods were so high up that they deemed themselves brothers of half-gods. They refused to think of themselves as being the same as humans after becoming gods. Fighting to the death for other humans would only earn them mockery. They would never do that. They wore bright clothes and used luxurious carriages to rush to the banquets of half-gods. The people they associated themselves with were gods too. They followed inflexible manners. Southern Heaven was a land of customs. Chinmu saw many sects in his tour there. They were sects built by the gods of Southern Heaven. They were nearly identical to those of Eternal Peace in the past. However, the past sects of Eternal Peace had stood in great numbers. They also controlled normal people's fortunes, lives, deaths, and the conquest of nations to steal land. However, the sects there loved and respected each other to the point that they never fought. The peacefulness there was akin to a pool of stagnant water. Normal people remained that way for their entire lives. The same for their descendants. They never had any chance of making a name for themselves. Any ambitions, ideals, or research into divine arts to benefit the people were illusions. Besides, nobody thought that way. Nobody did that. It was a world so peaceful that it became suffocating. Chinmu was solemn. Celestial Venerable Hua seemed to have sheltered the people of Southern Heaven, but in reality, what he did was get the humans there to accept a set fate with no way to free themselves. He came to a god city, which had a statue of Celestial Venerable Hua erected. It was tall and majestic and had a wheel of fire made from bronze behind its head. Celestial Venerable Hua's gaze on the statue seemed deep and far. He gazed into the distance in a wise and strong manner. There were many disciples of Celestial Venerable Hua there. They were teaching their own disciples, imparting the traditional divine treasure and celestial palace system in an orderly fashion, without any changes. However, when a disciple presented any doubts, they would be reprimanded harshly and even beaten. They would be judged by those around them too. The divine arts of Celestial Venerable Hua's disciples were nearly identical. Their divine weapons were nearly identical too. Even their clothing was nearly identical. They wore the same clothes and had the same hairstyles and facial hair. They were full of smiles when meeting people, and they said similar greetings and followed similar formalities. Chinmu clenched his fists and went by Celestial Venerable Hua's statue. His robes flew about like a large flag, making a lot of noise in the process. Whoosh! The tall and majestic statue of Celestial Venerable Hua suddenly collapsed and melted. It became molten bronze which had devilish flames on it. Celestial Venerable Hua's disciples hurried over to try and extinguish the devilish fire. Some of them were extremely strong practitioners that reached the Jade Capital Realm and the Numinous Sky Realm. Celestial Venerable Hua was specialized in fire divine arts. The paths, skills, and divine arts he passed down largely related to fire too. His disciples' attainments in that path were so extraordinary that they became well known in the celestial heavens. Yet, none of them knew what to do against the devilish flames. They couldn't extinguish the flames at all. "Get Big Brother!" The masses panicked and called out, "Get Big Brother quickly!" Suddenly an emperor's awe filled the city. An emperor's throne being dressed almost exactly like Celestial Venerable Hua flew out. He went on top of the flames and utilized his divine art to suppress it while hollering, "Extinguish!" The devilish flames shook, but they still weren't extinguished. The emperor's throne being used his divine arts again, sending them down to suppress the flames. "Extinguish! Extinguish! Extinguish!" The flames burnt on, brightening the face of the emperor's throne being. He was visibly embarrassed. Qin Mu was nearby and watched this scene coldly. He hated him for he wanted him to get better. He remarked, "He doesn't know how to adapt because he hasn't learned to before." Celestial Venerable Hua nurtured a pile of garbage. Yennefer looked at that pathetic great emperor's attempt to extinguish the flames. She flapped her wings and asked, "Master, why can't they extinguish your devilish flames? I see that their vital qi, cultivation and divine art power are much stronger than yours. They haven't learned it before." Qin Mu coldly mocked. In other words, Celestial Venerable Hua hasn't taught them before. The dragon Qilin carefully looked at Qin Mu and said, "Cult Master, I think Southern Heaven is still fine. At least people can settle down here without worrying about disasters until they're 60 years old. The people here are happy and appear to be carefree. If they have no long-term concerns, they must have short-term ones. People thrive in worry and die in peace. If no one invades from the outside, they can continue to thrive as a secluded world without ever knowing about the world outside." Qin Mu coldly mocked. "If an enemy from the outside invaded, how long do you think these indulgent and inflexible idiots of Southern Heaven could last? Without talking about others, my third brother Zhang Baigui could annihilate the nations of Southern Heaven dozens of times, including the millions of gods and devils of the Red Deity Celestial Palace, with a small army of a few hundred beings in the Jade Capital Realm." Filled with anger, he swept up his sleeves and said, "Go and extinguish the flames, Yennefer." Yennefer thought about it. It was Yudu's divine art, which she had watched Qin Mu cultivate before. Thus, she flew forward as a fat girl and waved her hands, causing the flames to disappear. Celestial Venerable Hua's disciples in the city were dumbstruck as they all looked at her. The strong practitioner of the Emperor's throne realm hurriedly paid his respects. "Lady, your abilities are extraordinary. Which divine mountain are you the saint of?" "I, Yin Yazi, hereby pay my respects to you." Yennefer was disgusted with Celestial Venerable Hua, so she didn't like his disciples. Thus, she left after giving a humph. Yin Yazi was stunned. He swept up his sleeves and said, "Such a lack of manners. How impudent." The masses remarked. Celestial Venerable said that only villains and women are hard to deal with. Such manners aren't common. Qin Mu led the dragon Qilin and Yennefer out of the city. Suddenly, he stopped as if he had a eureka moment, confusing the dragon Qilin and Yennefer. Suddenly, Qin Mu shouted, "I figured out Celestial Venerable Hua's weakness." The dragon Qilin became enlightened. Celestial Venerable Hua's weakness is Yudu divine arts. This is a lethal weakness. No, it's a fatal weakness. Qin Mu nodded and said, "The fact that his disciples can't extinguish my devilish flames proves that Celestial Venerable Hua doesn't understand them either. He has extremely low attainments in Yudu divine arts. That means that although his primordial spirit is strong, his soul is weak. This weakness of his is fatal." Celestial Venerable Hua killed South Deity and refined and occupied her cultivation. This made him incredibly strong in magic power. Even if he wasn't the first of the 10 Celestial Venerables, he was at least in the top 3. No one could beat his attainment in the path of fire divine arts, for he at least fused 18 Emperor's throne techniques. This proved that he was one of the stronger Celestial Venerables. Yet his weakness was too big. The one who could kill him easily was thus the daughter of Earth Count, Celestial Venerable Su. Celestial Venerable Hua knows this, so he gets close to Celestial Venerable Su. He doesn't have the fiery temper that others think. Instead, he's quite a schemer. Qin Mu thought, outside of Celestial Venerable Su, there's also Celestial Venerable Yu. Could this be the reason that he and Celestial Venerable you have a strained relationship? Actually, Son of Heaven Een could threaten him too. His weakness is too big. There will be trails left behind regardless of how well he hides it. When there was an invasion of Southern Heaven, it would be plunged into chaos since they wouldn't be able to resist at all. Only then would his sins and demerits be shown by the massacre of his people. By then, he would become the sinner that dragged the human race down. His ideals and persistence would crumble and collapse. By then, he would realize his mistakes. Before that, he would be a man who at least sheltered humans despite all the weird rules he imposed on them. His merits and demerits were unseen by the people of Southern Heaven then. Even some people of eternal peace who went there might feel that Southern Heaven was a pure land for humanity. If Chinmu forcefully said that he was a sinner, he would anger the people of Southern Heaven. They would cry for him to be lynched without understanding him. It took a lot of time to judge a person's merits and demerits. It was only when the dust of history settled that one would know where one erred. Chinmu calmed himself down to look for a place with beautiful scenery in Southern Heaven to visualize some houses. He would live in them and carefully comprehend Celestial Venerable Ling's letter. He had many comprehensions during those few days of understanding, yet he still couldn't form a system. The Dragon Qilin and Yenner got to settle down for once, so they let loose and ran around the place. With no one to disturb Chinmu's peace, he put his potted plant on the table and entered it, arriving at the house inside. The tea on the table was still warm. Chinmu lifted the cup, which should have been left behind by Wei Suifeng. He smelled it and felt refreshed. Chinmu read while drinking tea. Celestial Venerable Ling's letter was more on the path of creation, but it lacked mathematical reasonings and was hard to read. Chinmu was an expert in the path of creation, yet it was difficult for him to read through Celestial Venerable Ling's letter. Sometimes he had to use divine weapons to calculate before he could understand her. No wonder the celestial heavens couldn't decipher its contents despite having it for 40,000 years. If I took this to Tao Ancestor, he might not understand it either. Chinmu couldn't help but admire Celestial Venerable Ling, for her letter had a wide range of knowledge. A large portion of it was beyond the scope of algebra. Algebra couldn't answer it at all. Yet the contents of the back of her letter stated how her comprehension left the path of creation to reach another realm without life or death, disease or disasters. She comprehended that all changes come from changes in substances. Life, death, and pestilence came from changes in substances. Becoming a god was also a result of changes in substances. Chinmu even felt that almost all of the ancient gods were made out of substances. As long as there were substances, Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art could counter them. It was just that Celestial Venerable Ling's letter lacked the documentation and records of the power of such a divine art. She was like a researcher who cared little about how powerful it was. Yet, Chinmu saw terrifying potential in her divine art. Perhaps the number one divine art of the post-celestial Great Tao isn't Founding Emperor Sword Tao, but Celestial Venerable Ling's unchanging divine art. Her beliefs can become the most terrifying divine art in the world. Chinmu suddenly felt a chill down his spine. Although Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art couldn't deal with beings born from Great Tao like Heaven Duke, Earth Count, Celestial Empress Yuanmu, and Goddess of Heavenly Een, it could deal with Celestial Emperor and the Grand Emperor easily. She could even return Celestial Emperor back to his egg. Celestial Venerable Ling wasn't good at combat, while Chinmu made his living from it. As long as the egg of Celestial Emperor Taichu was still around, Celestial Venerable Ling could use unchanging substance to send him back to his egg and prevent him from being born. As for the Grand Emperor's great overarching supreme consciousness, it would be completely suppressed without the chance of coming back. Finally, Chinmu finished reading it. He couldn't help but yawn, lie down on the bookcases and fall asleep. As he began to snore, his hair rose as little Chinmus peeked out. They looked around, found no one, and became excited as they hollered. Thousands of little Chinmus climbed out of Chinmu's dreamscape. They jumped up and down to flip through Celestial Venerable Ling's letter. Some sat on the ground while some sat on the table. Some even sat on Chinmu's head to study it. Maha maha! In Chinmu's dream realm, small Chinmus shook their heads and spoke in a language no one understood. They arranged Celestial Venerable Ling's letter, which allowed them to have their own comprehensions before they sat together arguing. They fought on top of arguing, as they each used Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art that they had comprehended. A bunch of them yelled and beat each other up. The various small Qin Mews had their own strengths, but none of them could perfectly replicate Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art. They could only replicate part of it at best. Even so, Qin Mu's dream world was made into a mess as dream realms were shattered. When one dream realm was broken, another one was formed, causing them to remain stuck in Qin Mu's dream realms. Suddenly, a small Qin Mu waved his hand, and time seemingly stopped. However, time didn't stop. What did stop, in fact, was substances. The particles that made them up stopped moving. It seemed that even Qin Mu's dream realm froze. The small Qin Mews stopped moving. Even their eyes couldn't move. The small Qin Mu who deployed the divine art that froze substances couldn't move either. It has failed. A grand voice came and Qin Mu woke up from his dream. The dream realm collapsed, and the little Qin Mews dissipated like light smoke. Qin Mu stretched himself to pour tea for himself as many comprehensions he attained when he entered the dream flooded his mind. He drank tea while arranging said comprehensions. Then, he yawned as he put down the teacup and returned to sleep. The dream realm appeared again, and many more small Qin Mews poked their heads out from the dream realm before jumping out. The small Qin Mews had the knowledge arranged by Qin Mu, so they had a deeper understanding of unchanging substance than the previous Qin Mews. Many small Qin Mews sat together solemnly as they engaged in a discussion. Ma! Yegu! Their discussion was heated, but after it, they had many differing opinions, which split them into factions. None of the factions could convince the others, so they fought. Ultimately, the Jigu faction won against the Maha faction and Jigu faction. After their total victory, they tied up the poor little guys into rows. The small leader of the Jigu faction stretched his wings and cheered. The other little Qin Mews gathered beneath him and worked together to deploy unchanging substance divine arts. Everything became still in the dream world. Yet the little Qin Mews of the Jigu faction could still move, which made them very happy as they showed off to the little Qin Mews that were tied up. Suddenly, their divine art seemed to change in a weird manner as the small Qin Mews seemingly became younger. The small Qin Mews of the Jigu faction were perplexed. They were discussing the problem when they saw everyone becoming younger. Soon, they became naked toddlers that rattled on solemnly. The grand voice spoke again. Another failure. Before the voice settled, the dream realm collapsed again. The naked toddlers cried before the dream realm dissipated like smoke. Although the tea in the pot lost its taste, Qin Mu poured another pot and drank while arranging his comprehensions. He was the number one in creation divine arts, yet even he had a hard time comprehending Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art. Even if he comprehended according to teachings, he was afraid of errors that would cause those little guys in the dream to die 1,000 times. Luckily, he had Brahma Buddha's Boundless Calamity Sutra, and entered the path via dreams. Thus he could use dreams to deduce and solve and find the only correct path from countless deaths. He slept again, and in his dream, the knowledge accumulated by the little Qin Mews became even deeper. Yet, this time the divide between the little Qin Mews was more severe. It almost became one faction per person. No one recognized anyone else. They slaughtered each other. It was clear that in his sleep, Qin Mu became more unrestrained. Since they couldn't convince others, they just annihilated them so the biggest devil would be in charge. And it was a nest of them. Qin Mu had no choice but to split the dream realms to prevent them from gathering. Yet they communicated through them, seeing each other as heretics to be annihilated. They surprisingly broke through the dream realms to kill each other in another chaotic battle. Suddenly, small Qin Mews deployed the unchanging substance divine art that they comprehended themselves. Everyone became older at a visible rate. Soon they became less than a meter tall and had white hair and beards so long they reached the ground. They beat each other up with their walking sticks by hammering each other's heads with them. Qin Mu woke up and removed the dream realm. He fell back into the dream world with great perseverance after arranging things. Soon he woke up again, for he failed again. The Boundless Calamity Sutra seemed to have met an unsolvable problem. The difficulty of Celestial Venerable Ling's unchanging substance divine art was insane. It was almost undecipherable. If Qin Mu comprehended by the rules, thousands of years would have passed by now. He probably would have died countless times too. He would have died differently every time as well. How weird. Qin Mu entered the dream again and again to find a strand of possibility from thousands of errors. In this dream realm, a little Qin Mu suddenly deployed the divine art. A very mysterious Tao voice rang out, and fog flooded out. The other little Qin Mus were stunned as they looked at the scene. The fog enveloped a wider and wider area. They were shrouded too. Soon the fog dissipated, and all that was left were piles of bones. It was another failure. Qin Mu dissipated the dream realm, but he was pleasantly surprised. He jumped up and walked around in visible excitement. Although he had failed again, this failure allowed him to see the dawn of victory. He finally felt the path of the unchanging substance divine art. Although he was at the start of said path, if he continued on it, he would certainly comprehend it. He jumped out of the potted plant world and walked outside and out of the room. The outside world was filled with lush mountains and clear water. White clouds leisurely floated above as the dragon Qilin laid underneath the tree while Yenner fed him strawberries. Qin Mu was stunned. Before he entered, the strawberries were just about to bloom. It was still spring then. Now they had matured. Didn't that mean that half a year had gone by? He looked out and saw fruits maturing everywhere in the mountains. No one harvested them. I'm not the smartest person in the world. Without the Boundless Calamity Sutra, it would probably have taken 100,000 years for me to comprehend to this stage. Qin Mu breathed in the air, which was filled with the sweetness of fruits. He didn't alert Yenner and the dragon Qilin. Instead, he returned to the room and into the potted plant to continue comprehension. The dragon Qilin looked over and at the house before saying, Cult Master entered that place a year and a half ago and hasn't emerged yet. Is Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art really that difficult? Yenner's figure had returned to normal by then. She fed him with a smile and said, It's good that Master spends more time there, for we can go on a tour together. A tiny Earth Count walked out of the forest while dragging a large white rhinoceros. It was as large as a small hill, yet it was beaten unconscious by him. Moo, the tiny Earth Count solemnly said. Yenner spat out fire and roasted it. The little guy stood beside the grilled rhinoceros and tried his best to eat. After more than a year, he had finally learned to take care of himself in the potted plant world. Qin Mu entered his dream again and again. He experienced countless failures, but he also gradually made progress in Celestial Venerable Ling's unchanging substance divine art. The divine art became more and more complete. It was already very hard to learn the divine art, which made it clear how heaven-defying it was for Celestial Venerable Ling to comprehend it. That was why Celestial Venerable You said that Celestial Venerable Ling had the highest aptitude and comprehension, and that he was nothing compared to her. Yet, Qin Mu found an even harsher truth. That truth was that he would become unchanging substance after completely deploying the unchanging substance divine art. In other words, using it would lead to a terrifying outcome. He would be assimilated by it to become unchanging substance, a form that he could never escape from. He entered his dream again and again and tried again and again. However, the results were the same every time. The Qin Mus in his dream would become unchanging substance, a bunch of fog. Celestial Venerable Ling was the fog on the surging river. After deploying the divine art, she assimilated to form the unchanging substance. She herself was trapped in it too, without any chance of escape. Of course, when she became unchanging substance, she dragged the Grand Emperor's reincarnation, the 11th Celestial Venerable, Ming Fongyu, into it. Celestial Venerable Ming Fongyu was using the real Celestial Emperor corporeal body then, which spurred the 10 Celestial Venerables to use the creation divine weapon to create another Celestial Emperor to continue their rule. The most terrifying thing about this divine art wasn't how many people it trapped, but how one couldn't escape from being unchanging substance after using it. Even Ming Fongyu and the ancient Celestial Emperor's corporeal body couldn't break out of it, and the reincarnation cycles forced onto them. That was the case for Qin Mu in the dream. He deployed the divine art again and again, and he was assimilated again and again. The little Qin Mus of his dream became fog and were forever lost in it. He wanted to find a way out for Celestial Venerable Ling, yet that was the case every time with no exceptions. That meant that if Qin Mu completely deployed it, he would become unchanging substance too and end up like Celestial Venerable Ling. However, he had other discoveries too. If he used part of it, he wouldn't be assimilated. That was why Celestial Venerable Ling used the ghost ship to exile the feathered forest guards before she perfected the divine art. Finally, Qinmu stopped dreaming. Instead, he took out the 5 Dao runes he comprehended from the egg of Tai Shi. The only way to liberate Big Senior Brother and Celestial Venerable Ling is to use the egg to break Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art. Whether I can do that, however, depends on verifying how correct the 5 runes are. Qinmu calmed himself down. He figuratively experienced thousands of years of traveling in his dream. It was an illusion caused by changes in substances in his dream. The 5 runes were Tai Shi's great Dao runes that he comprehended from its egg. Wei Suifeng tried to hack Tai Shi's egg, which caused it to give out infinite amounts of Dao light that broke the ghost ship temporarily. This allowed it to temporarily escape from the unchanging substance before sinking back in again. It was then that Qinmu knew that the Dao of Tai Shi was the solution to the unchanging substance divine art. He needed Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art to verify whether the 5 Dao runes he comprehended from Tai Shi's egg were correct. He meticulously set down the runes Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art needed. He was surrounded by weird runes that his vital qi created. They flickered and hid mysterious power. Qinmu was careful. He couldn't allow those runes to form the unchanging substance divine art, for he would be stuck in it and become unchanging substance. He carefully put together the unchanging substance divine art runes to form divine art parts that came into contact with the 5 runes to test the reactions between them. This rune is wrong. This rune is wrong too. This isn't correct either. He finished testing all 5 runes and frowned. He exhausted his knowledge to calculate them from the rune markings of Tai Shi's egg, yet they were all wrong. He couldn't help but feel anxious. He walked around and suddenly had a eureka moment. He took out the Tai Shi egg and placed it in the middle of the unchanging runes. I calculated these 5 runes from the Dao voice. The Dao of Tai Shi within might be incomplete. Big Senior Brother broke 3 of his fingers when he tried to hack it. Aside from the Dao voice, when the ancient god egg fought back, it created markings from Dao light.
Qinmu's gaze flashed.
He stopped utilizing the parts of the unchanging substance divine art, and instead attacked the ancient god egg. He attacked the egg in hopes that he could provoke it to retaliate and show the beautiful Dao markings he had seen on the ghost ship, so that he could comprehend what was missing from the 5 runes via the Dao markings. The unchanging substance divine art was activated, and as soon as it landed on Tai Shi's egg, the flawless and perfectly spherical egg glowed. A Dao voice that sounded like the recital and prayers of billions of ancient gods was emitted from it. Ringing filled Qinmu's ears as his third eye opened. It stared at the Dao markings coming from the ancient god egg. Outside, Yenner walked quickly towards the farm with her basket. As for the dragon Qilin, he was planting in the fields. He had finished planting around 100 acres worth of farmland with vegetables and spirit medicine. Yenner retrieved a towel and carefully gave it to the dragon Qilin for him to wipe the sweat off his forehead. She opened the basket and said, "Look, I heated a plate of spirit pills for you." The dragon Qilin, who had morphed into a youth with the head of a Qilin, sat on the farmland and ate the steamy hot spirit pills. Yenner fed him water and gently said, "Eat slowly so you won't choke." Outside, the trees shook before collapsing. The tiny earth count walked out with an elephant with wings. It was a half-god of southern heaven. He was shot down when flying and dragged there to be eaten. The tiny earth count was about to drag it into the fields when the dragon Qilin chased him out. "Don't trample on the medicine I just planted." The tiny earth count placed the elephant aside, looked at Yenner helplessly and said, "Moo." Yenner was going to help him grill the elephant when she suddenly looked at the house that Qinmu had visualized. It suddenly lit up, and terrifying light burst open from the inside of the house. Whoosh! Violent winds pulverized the house as Grand Dao voice reverberated in the area. The light burst forth as the earth cracked and mountains shook. Yenner quickly deployed her wings to protect the dragon Qilin and the tiny earth count from that terrifying wave. In a hurry, she only saw Qinmu flailing around as he was sent flying into the air by that terrifying wave. Yenner immediately looked up and saw white smoke coming from a large mountain far away. The same happened to the mountain behind it too. The white smoke came from the white powder created by broken stones of the mountains that Qinmu crashed into. White smoke came from another mountain far away. When one looked further beyond, more and more mountains were broken through by Qinmu. It was impossible to know when Qin Mu would stop. Yenna retracted her wings, and the dragon Qilan's expression changed drastically. He stomped his feet and said, "Our medicine farm was destroyed." Yenna unnervingly said, "You should be worried about Master instead." The dragon Qilan quickly looked at the house. He saw only a large crater with the Taisher egg at the bottom. The Tao markings on it slowly went away. "You'll guard the egg here while I'll find Master." Yenna quickly flew away. The dragon Qilan responded and called the tiny earth count to guard the egg with him. He kneeled down beside the ancient god egg and listened in. He turned around and probed. "Moo!" The dragon Qilan touched his small head and said, "This can't be eaten. One can't grill it." Har! The tiny earth count was sad. Yenna flew for thousands of miles before finding Qin Mu in a word-shaped cave in a large mountain. Qin Mu was stuck in its walls with his legs split open and his arms outstretched. He was heavily injured and immobilized. When Yenna arrived, the mountain god guarding the place, which was a mandrill, was peeking inside the hole. Yenna chased it away before quickly extracting Qin Mu. Qin Mu coughed out blood before laughing. He coughed out blood while laughing as if he was a geyser spraying out blood. Yenna quickly said, "Stop laughing, Master, or else your blood will be gone." Qin Mu utilized the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique to steady himself. He could barely sit up as he smiled and said, "I'm fine. I just lost half my life, not my entire life." I cracked open the first rune. Yenna was shocked as she said, "Master, it's been 2 years. You only cracked the first rune? How long will it take for you to fully crack open Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art?" "It's been 2 years?" Qin Mu was stunned. He believed that at most a year had passed. Surprisingly, 2 years had passed. That was why he disliked shutting himself in like other divine arts practitioners and gods. While it sounded powerful, one would always leave the real world and shut themselves in for dozens or even hundreds of years. Thus, one would miss a lot of things in people like the development of paths, skills, and divine arts. Thus, one would become obsolete coming out. Shutting himself in for 2 years was intolerable to him. The good thing was that with a clear comprehension of Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art and the retaliation of the Taisher egg, he finally comprehended the first great Tao rune of Taisher. Yenna became secretly happy as she thought, if Master took 2 years to comprehend the first rune of Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art, doesn't that mean he'll need to stay here for a long time? If so, I can stay here with my darling for a long time. Qin Mu stood up, stretched himself and said, "Yenna, let's go back. We'll leave Southern Heavens now." Yenna disappointingly asked, "Why can't you stay here to comprehend divine arts, Master?" "I have comprehended Celestial Venerable Ling's divine art. There are no benefits to staying here." They returned back to the dragon Qilan's place. Qin Mu retrieved the Taisher egg and said, "It's time to leave. I want to learn about the attack on the Great Void by the Celestial Heavens. Also, we're getting closer and closer to the day in which I break the ghost ship's divine art." He hadn't recovered yet, so all he could do was sit on the dragon Qilan's back while he rushed towards Southern Heaven's Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge. When they were beside it, Qin Mu looked back at the vast land. It was peaceful and devoid of war and conflicts. The people here don't know, but they actually have another choice. However, they have been educated to live in servitude, and thus they can no longer rebel. Qin Mu patted the dragon Qilan, who brought him and Yenna into a Spirit Energy Mutual Shift Bridge. Qin Mu's face sank as he thought quietly, they are just livestock raised by half-gods. At best, they'll politely ask how you are when they eat you. Death isn't terrifying. What's terrifying, however, is not attaining a better future for their descendants. Perhaps they'll mock eternal peace for overestimating its own capabilities, just like Celestial Venerable Hu mocked me. He couldn't help but laugh. The Great Void. Multiple divine weapon 4 deities suppressed the crumbling void, as the army of the Celestial Heavens entered to attack the Great Void. The Masters of Creation tried to ambush them like gorillas in the void. They used the divine weapon 4 deities stolen by Jiang Baigui and Emperor Yanfeng to try and cause chaos, in an attempt to interrupt the advance of the army of the Celestial Heavens. Yet, it was the 4 great heavenly teachers and the 4 deities of the poles who led the army this time. The 4 great heavenly teachers were highly intelligent, while black deity, white deity, green deity, and red deity were strong. Although the masters of creation succeeded somewhat, they also suffered heavy casualties and had to withdraw. Divine King Langwa brought void beasts with her and personally led the army, inflicting heavy casualties to the army of the celestial heavens. However, Celestial Venerable Hua and Celestial Venerable Hong arrived quickly and heavily injured Langwa, forcing the army of void beasts to withdraw. The masters of creation were out of ideas. All they could do was guard the great void and wait for the grand battle's arrival. Yet, everyone knew that the battle would be brutal and bloody. There were few masters of creation in the great void to begin with, and even fewer among them would survive. The first heavenly master of eternal peace. How do you think we should block the army of the celestial heavens and reduce their power? Yin Yunqi asked. Zhang Baigui said, simple, we'll base our defense on treachery. The most treacherous place is the crumbling void. Yin Yunqi's eyes flashed as she said. Divine King Langwa led the void beast army to fight and returned with heavy casualties. The strong practitioners of the masters of creation can do nothing either. How will you do that, heavenly master of eternal peace empire? Zhang Baigui peculiarly asked, are you testing me? You should know it yourself. Are you probing my intelligence? Yin Yunqi deployed her fan with a whoosh sound and said, you're the first heavenly master of eternal peace, here to reinforce us. State your solution. I want to see your worth. Zhang Baigui plainly said. How much I'm worth? When the eternal peace calamity happened, I was worth nothing. The smile on Yin Yunqi's face froze. During the eternal peace calamity, founding emperor ordered that Fengdu be shrunk, and thus the gods of eternal peace didn't help eternal peace save people. Zhang Baigui bringing this up caused her to feel guilty. However, I'm not you lot, so I'm here to help. Zhang Baigui said. If I were you, I would pick 3,000 human trash and send them to the crumbling void. Their Tao hearts must be corrupt and filled with fear. The devils in their hearts will be born endlessly to form a terrifying army that can block the army of the celestial heavens. Yin Yunqi's eyes lit up as she smiled and said, I agree with that. Then, heavenly teacher Zishi, how much am I worth? Zhang Baigui asked. Even the celestial river navy with 1,000,000-strong force is no match for you. Yin Yunqi violently slapped her fan to summon the junior protector of the crown prince, Feng Yuji. She ordered, Old Feng, get me 3,000 people from Carefree Village that are bootlickers, stagnant and indulgent. Send them to the crumbling void to block the army of the celestial heavens. Feng Yuji was the old god who cleaned his coffin until it was shiny with oil. He was happy when he heard that and said, how can 3,000 be enough? How about 30,000 instead? Yin Yunqi replied, the more the better, but not too many. Just in case their families make a ruckus. Feng Yuji left hastily. Yin Yunqi glanced at Zhang Baigui and asked, do you think you can block the army of the celestial heavens, heavenly master Zhang? Zhang Baigui shook his head and said, no. Although this plan can inflict casualties on the celestial heavens, it can't block them. The celestial heavens will send more celestial venerables to suppress the void. By then the army of the celestial heavens will attack and engage in combat with us. They will have 10 celestial venerables and we will lose. Yin Yunqi asked, how do we break this? Get founding Emperor Langwa to attack the celestial heavens by surprise via the Void Bridge. Zhang Baigui said. If the celestial heavens are disturbed, the celestial venerables won't dare to commit fully to the attack on the Great Void. A stalemate can be caused this way. Yin Yunqi shuddered, bowed and said, I'm won over. Mister, please wait. She left quickly. Emperor Yanfeng came to Zhang Baigui's side and whispered, she's interested in you since you won against her. I heard that this heavenly teacher she swore to wear feminine clothes when she meets someone she likes, and to marry no one else but him. Imperial Preceptor, I think she went to change into feminine clothes. Her name is Yunxi, not Zishi. It's the name of a female. Zhang Baigui glanced at him, shook his head and said, you're talking nonsense again, Emperor. I'm forever loyal to my cheap wife until my death. As they were talking, Yin Yunxi came out in feminine clothes. She was elegant and attractive, a rare beauty. She went to Zhang Baigui's side and was about to speak when Zhang Baigui bowed and said, Senior Uncle Yan. Yin Yunxi's face became completely pale. You really are ruthless, Imperial Preceptor. Emperor Yanfeng sneakily gave him a thumbs up. You're the real beauty killer, Imperial Preceptor. Son of Heaven Yin pales in comparison to you. Emperor Yanfeng felt some sympathy when he saw how disheartened and disappointed Yan Yunqi was. However, the dominant feeling in his heart was admiration. Admiration for Eternal Peace's former Imperial Preceptor, Zhang Baigui. He was always honest towards ladies. In Eternal Peace, he was determined to become a saint and had no thoughts towards love and pleasure. He even thought of it as a burden. If not for his forced gift of marriage and the guidance of Qin Mu, Zhang Baigui would probably still be single today. He had that kind of power and ability. Zhang Baigui was a devoted person. He was fine when not in love, but when he would become extremely loyal. Even though Yan Yunqi was smarter and prettier than his wife, he didn't take it to heart at all. This was why his wife felt relaxed about him leaving Eternal Peace. One sentence from Zhang Baigui annihilated Yan Yunqi's hope in a cruel manner. Zhang Baigui bowed and said to Yan Yunqi, "Uncle, since I'm worth an army of 1,000,000 gods and devils, should there be a calamity in Eternal Peace, I hope you'll help with said army." Yan Yunqi nodded silently with a pale expression. Zhang Baigui straightened himself and solemnly said, "Thus, uncle, you can go and prepare with Divine King Langhua and Founding Emperor." Yan Yunqi left. At the same time they heard a lazy voice from below which said, "You're really powerful, little brother." Zhang Baigui and Emperor Yanfeng looked down from the tower and saw a large man in shabby clothes sunbathing at the bottom. He leisurely caught the fleas on his body while constantly laughing as if he was mentally unstable. Emperor Yanfeng's gaze flashed as he whispered, "When did this beggar come? He looks crazy. I didn't detect him at all. Heavenly Teacher Shi is a great master, and she failed to detect him too." Zhang Baigui leaped down from the tower and stood in front of him with his hands behind his back. He leisurely said, "Of course I'm powerful." The madman caught fleas while looking up at him, then laughed. "Disciple of woodcutter Wentianga? As expected, you speak with haughtiness in your tone." He stood up and put one of the fleas into his mouth, which crackled, then spat it out and said, "Even Wentianga isn't so haughty in front of me, for he lost to me. All of the 4 great heavenly teachers attacking you are wise. You might not be able to beat them even by working together with Zishi." Zhang Baigui leisurely said, "They're old and outdated. I'll counter them in formations. However, their power is overwhelming." The madman laughed and said, "How many do you have in Carefree Village? How many masters of creation are there? How many battles can you withstand? You'll soon run out of soldiers. You are fighting thousands of worlds with the masters of creation and Carefree Village. You can't win." Zhang Baigui frowned. The madman laughed. "Aren't you very good? Woodcutter Wentianga is already haughty enough, yet you're haughtier." Zhang Baigui said with humility, "I'm not the most powerful of Eternal Peace. I have a brother who's always better than me in the same realm. However, compared to others who are triangles, I'm a straight line." The madman was stunned. It took a while for him to understand. He continued, "I'm talking about wisdom, not power." "I see," Zhang Baigui said. "In terms of wisdom, my second brother would have to flatter me. He's not as smart as me. Compared to me, he's missing a vertical straight line." The madman laughed and leisurely said, "Then we shall compete. I'll lay the formation and you'll break it. If you can, I'll help you against the 4 great heavenly teachers. If you can't, I'll watch you die." Zhang Baigui's eyebrows were raised as he asked, "Who might you be?" The madman lost all of his craziness as he straightened his body. With an imposing posture and an awe-inspiring voice he replied, "The previous number 1 heavenly master of the celestial heavens, Yu Ting of the Tao sect. The current 4 great heavenly teachers of the celestial heavens lost to me. The 4 great heavenly teachers of Founding Emperor, fisherman, woodcutter, farmer and scholar, lost to me as well in both might and wisdom." Zhang Baigui was moved as he pleaded, "The previous Imperial Preceptor of Eternal Peace, Zhang Baigui, hereby asks for your guidance." Yu Ting's aura was aggressive as he used his vital qi to display his formation. They formed models of soldiers and treasures which he used to line up his formation. The formation was special, as it surprisingly resembled the form of the number 1 treasure, the glassy sky pagoda. It was split into 28 heavens with various treasures in each heaven. Soldiers and formations were deployed around the treasures. Not much, but they were able to become one with the treasures to form thousands of picturesque formations. In addition, each formation of Yuting's was different. There were thousands of different formations formed from thousands of treasures. Each one of those formations became one with the treasures. Even more terrifyingly, he used few people. Yet each formation structure was able to unite the formation with people and treasures in a tight manner. It was easy to defend yet hard to attack. Yuting finished his formation and solemnly said, "This formation is called the Great Formation Picture of Dragon Mountain." It was restored and illustrated by the number 2 Heavenly Master, Shang Pining, who went crazy for thousands of years after being defeated by secluded Formation Master Dragon Mountain Sanren. Shang Pining called forth all the wise men of the world to try and break it. Nobody could break it after hundreds of thousands of years. I did it, which gave me the title of the number 1 Heavenly Master of the Celestial Heavens. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor looked at the formation formed by the glassy sky pagoda and shuddered. Many of the formation skills of this formation were researched during Eternal Peace's reform. Who is this Dragon Mountain Sanren of the past? In the great formation picture of the glassy sky pagoda, there were too many of Eternal Peace's formations. 3 people stood out as having the highest attainments in formations in Eternal Peace. One of them was the previous Imperial Preceptor, Zhang Baigui. The other 2 were God Eyes Blind of Disabled Elderly Village and West Earth Formation Master He. They pioneered many different formation skills and formations, entering the path with changes in formations. Besides the 3 of them, there were also General of Heavenly Strategies Qin Jian as well as Qin Baoyue, who was famous for his killing formations, and Situ Xiaoleching, who became famous for laying formations via the might of heaven and earth. There was also Grand General of the White Horse Quan Wooding, who was famous for his battle formations. They all had their own specialties. The formations used in Dragon Mountain Sanren's Great Formation Picture largely contained formation pictures of Eternal Peace. Other formations were variations of those from Eternal Peace's reform, but more intricate. It was just that there were thousands of other formation skills that Zhang Baigui had never seen before. Still, breaking it wasn't too difficult for him. When he examined it, he couldn't help but admire this Dragon Mountain Sanren. The formation was actually a combination of thousands of formations and formation skills. In combination, they formed a giant killing formation. Thousands of formations working together to become one complete formation. Yuting coughed and reminded him. Zhang Baigui, the order of these 28 heavens can be changed at any time. Zhang Baigui's heart shuddered as he slowly nodded and said, "It's indeed powerful. No wonder it held up against wise men of the world for hundreds of thousands of years." However, he could still see how the one who laid the formation did it in a hasty manner. That Dragon Mountain Sanren could have made it more intricate, but there were many flaws due to what seemed to be a lack of energy in laying formations. He was right. Qin Mu's consciousness at that point was heavily injured by the Grand Emperor. He was groggy and barely conscious, which caused a lot of flaws in his formation. Besides, he laid it via the Dragon Qilin, which granted him the title of the number 1 Heavenly Master. However, because of this, there were many shortcomings in the formation. The most terrifying thing about the Great Formation Picture of Dragon Mountain was how the 28 heavens could change their order at any time, which would cause previous efforts to break it to be wasted. That was because by changing their order, one could erase another's prior efforts. Eternal Peace Heavenly Master, how many men do you need to break it? Yuting asked. Zhang Baigui thought in silence before replying, 500,000. Yuting was stunned. He used 1,000,000 to break it. Zhang Baigui morphed into 500,000 gods and devils with his own vital qi while Yuting was in control of the Great Formation Picture of Dragon Mountain Sanren. He used various formations and waited for him to break it. It was a formation picture that nobody had broken in the hundreds of thousands of years since the Dragon Han era. Every heavenly master knew about it. Yuting became famous worldwide because he broke it. As such, he was conferred the title of the number 1 Heavenly Master of the Celestial Heavens. He personally took control of the formation picture and used dazzling arrays of formations. If one wasn't intelligent enough, they could become dizzy from looking at it for one moment and find it hard to identify things, much less break it. The army that Zhang Baigui's vital qi morphed into went straight in. He did things differently from Shang Pining then. Shang Pining broke every formation he saw steadily and slowly. In comparison, he deployed his army straight to the top of the 28 heavens. Yu Ting sighed, for he knew that Zhang Baigui knew the trick to breaking this formation picture instantly. Yu Ting took many years to come up with this trick. At the top laid the heaven ball, which was the ancient god egg of the glassy sky pagoda. Zhang Baigui used superior might to occupy the areas around it without attacking it. By doing so, he blocked the egg with mirrors to lock it. He deployed his formation inversely as he moved his army into thousands of different formations in a way that was more delicate than the formations in the great formation picture of Dragon Mountain, which astounded Yu Ting. Yu Ting was stunned. The core of the thousands of formation skills of the formation picture was the egg. Zhang Baigui concentrated his superior force to attack it quickly and lay down the 28 heavens formation around it, using the egg as the core. By doing so, he became the host and occupied the 28 heavens of the formation picture, allowing him to push out the 28 heavens formation. As such, his formation picture replaced the great formation picture of Dragon Mountain and became the new 28 heavens formation picture, with the egg as its core. Yu Ting could no longer reverse the 28 heavens, as Zhang Baigui occupied it and reversed it. Soon all the formation skills in it were broken. Not one survived. Yu Ting sighed, dissipated his vital qi and said, "You're a genius. This formation is the great formation picture of Dragon Mountain Sanren. However, this treasure is the #1 treasure in the world, the glassy sky pagoda. Yet, you broke it too using the least amount of men and suffering few casualties. You really are the #1 heavenly master of eternal peace." Zhang Baigui pulled back his vital qi as well, asking, "Heavenly master Yu, did you use this method too?" Yu Ting's pride was shaken as he shook his head with his hands behind his back. He disappointingly replied with an outpour of aura, "I didn't. After I entered the heaven ball, I used the method of nailing wedges. I nailed them into the 28 heavens one by one to limit the changes. I used 1,000,000 men to break it and suffered heavy casualties." He recovered, smiled and asked, "You said your brother is superior in everything except intelligence. This claim sounds familiar to me. Who might your brother be?" Zhang Baigui replied, "Heavenly Master Yu, you probably haven't heard of him before, for he is Celestial Venerable Mu." Yu Ting was startled. He recovered and laughed. "So it's him. This fellow is very haughty and acts like he's the second greatest after the heavens. I've disliked him for a long time." He nodded with glory overflowing on his face. "He's stronger in everything else. His speech is so infuriating that you can be suffocated by it. Yet, he's not as intelligent as us." Zhang Baigui nodded too, feeling the same way. They smiled at each other, for they knew that they had found their bosom friend. They both had the pleasure of looking down at and crushing Qin Mu with their intelligence. The celestial heavens. Qin Mu walked out of the spirit energy mutual shift bridge and thought, "I wonder how the battle at the Great Void is going. Confounding Emperor and Lang would defend against the onslaught of the celestial heavens." He was unnerved. The cooperation between Carefree Village and the Permitha World's Masters of Creation was spurred on by him. He had also planned the inciting of Carefree Village's bloodthirst, as well as the reignition of Carefree Village's reform via refining weapons in the Great Void. If, however, the celestial heavens gathered a very large army of the celestial heavens, they might not be able to hold on. He looked around and saw that the celestial heavens had become way more empty than usual. Although the celestial heavens was vast and boundless, there were many gods and devils that resided there, which caused the place to be constantly crowded. Now, almost half of the celestial heavens' forces were mobilized, which made the celestial street empty, as fewer people traveled on it. It seems that the celestial heavens has gathered its forces to attack the Great Void and prepare for one decisive battle. That's indeed the most time and force-efficient method. Qin Mu was shaken. The 10 celestial venerables had to be mobilized to use this method. After all, there were 2 celestial venerable level beings in the Great Void, Founding Emperor and Langhua. It was just that he didn't know how many of the 10 celestial venerables had been mobilized. Only if Founding Emperor can withstand it will they be pulled into a stalemate. Only then can the Great Void be used to refine and forge weapons. If they fail, they can only retreat and hold the Void Bridge. Qin Mu narrowed his eyes and looked at the Jade Capital in the distance. If the 10 celestial venerables wanted to get rid of founding Emperor and Langwa with minimal losses, they had to use at least 6 celestial venerables. It was the only way for a perfect victory. There had to be 2 celestial venerables guarding and controlling the celestial emperor corporeal body in the celestial heavens to prevent an attack from Heaven Duke and Earth Count. I don't know how many celestial venerables headed for the Great Void. He was thinking about it when torrential sword energy was activated in the celestial heavens chambers of concubines. Qin Mu's heart shuddered as he looked on hastily. He saw a sword light rise into the air from celestial emperor's chambers of concubines to form the apparition of the 34 heavens of the sword path, which suppressed the celestial heavens. The sword light rose into the air, and crackling immediately came from the halls and palaces of the celestial heavens. The palaces and halls cracked open as if they were cut open by a sharp sword. Loud noises came from Qin Mu's back too. He immediately turned around and saw how the southern heavenly gate of the celestial heavens was sliced neatly into 2. Founding Emperor Qin Yi has arrived at the Dragon Han celestial heavens to pay a visit to Celestial Emperor. Founding Emperor's voice came from the chambers of concubines in the Jade capital. It was grand and loud as it reverberated in everyone's ears. There was an uproar across the celestial heavens. Although half of the celestial heavens forces headed for the Great Void, there were still many people guarding the celestial heavens. The left and right feathered forest guards, left and right divine awe guards, left and right divine stratagem guards, the 6 imperial guards of the celestial heavens, and thousands of other gods and devils rose into the air to get into formation before rushing towards the chambers of concubines. Qin Mu immediately rose into the air to get a better view. Your awe is unparalleled and unchallenged, Emperor. Yet you choose to hide in the numinous sky hall and not show yourself. Why, Emperor? Founding Emperor pulled out the carefree sword and gently swung it in the chambers of concubines. Instantly, the sword ripped the void, causing an indefinite expansion of space that separated him from the 6 imperial guards chasing after him. They tried their best to fly towards him, yet the space between them expanded, causing them to be unable to get close to Founding Emperor no matter how fast they flew. Founding Emperor put the carefree sword back into its hilt and walked towards the numinous sky hall, saying loudly, I heard that the 10 celestial venerables laid a trap and killed you a long time ago, Celestial Emperor. After that, they made a substitute in order to fool everyone. He walked quickly, yet not hastily, and leisurely said, If you're real Emperor, then take a blow from my sword. In terms of divine arts, Founding Emperor's sword path was the quickest. He was straightforward and his sword was sharp. However, Celestial Venerable Hao's divine art was different, and its power was only fully unleashed now. He looked down on post-celestial Dao, which is why he only cultivated pre-celestial Dao. Post-celestial Dao varied greatly, but only a few can be cultivated to the apex. For example, Crimson Light Era's creation path and Founding Emperor Era's sword path. Among them, Founding Emperor's sword path was the pinnacle of pinnacles, achieving the 34th heaven of the sword path. Even the path of creation in Crimson Light Era had never reached the height of the sword path. However, pre-celestial Dao is different as it used ancient gods as its template and many people cultivated it. They could comprehend a lot from studying the ancient gods, which made it easier to start. Historically, many Emperor's Throne practitioners comprehended their own Emperor's Throne techniques by referencing the ancient gods. As a Celestial Venerable, it was easy for Celestial Venerable how to obtain these techniques. And because of his half-god bloodline, it made learning them much easier for him. Even though his comprehension towards the pre-celestial Dao isn't as exceptional as Founding Emperor's 34 heavens, it was still extremely high. His myriad Dao domain erupted, crushing Founding Emperor's sword path domain. The storm created by the shattered sword path domain and the myriad Dao domain swept the surroundings and destroyed everything. The only place not destroyed are the land behind each venerable's body, including Numinous Sky Treasured Hall, which is still standing tall behind Celestial Venerable Hao. Other than that, Jade Capital was almost swept clean. Celestial Venerable Hao's face became dim as he looked at the sword wound on his right hand. He said solemnly, Qin Yi, as the 8th Celestial Venerable of Dragon Han, you are still lacking. Founding Emperor wiped away the blood next to his mouth. It was clear that his injuries were not light. He said indifferently, You had 900,000 more years than me, and yet you could only cultivate to this step. How you are old and can't improve anymore. but I'm still in the process of improving. His body trembled as a single-sword celestial palace appeared from behind him. He said lightly, "That year Celestial Venerable Mu, together with you, imparted the method of becoming a god to the masses. At the end you said that Celestial Venerable you deduced that there was still a realm higher, Celestial Heaven's realm. However, from my viewpoint, Celestial Heaven's realm is just ruining a masterpiece with crude strokes." 1. Celestial Venerable Hao stared at his sword Celestial Palace, his pupil shrinking suddenly. Celestial Venerables Chang's and Zhao's gazes landed on his sword Celestial Palace, their visions filled with doubt. Founding Emperor was too strong, yet he only had one Celestial Palace. This was almost impossible. His current strength compared to the current Celestial Venerables is above average. How can just a single Celestial Palace have such strong strength? I only cultivated a single Celestial Palace. I only used 40,000 years to be on par with your so-called 10 Celestial Venerables. Founding Emperor smiled faintly and said leisurely, "Using 36 Celestial Palaces and 72 treasured halls to construct Celestial Heavens. Even if you waste all your energy, you still can't cultivate it. The Celestial Heavens realm is just a conjecture of Celestial Venerable you. In my opinion, it doesn't exist. In fact, the God realm doesn't exist either. There's only one realm after the divine treasures, and that is the Tao realm. Hao Chang Shao, you've been walking down the wrong path." Celestial Venerable Hao snickered. "You're injured, and your injury is even heavier than mine. What are you saying?" Celestial Venerable Shao was in deep thoughts. A slight smile appeared on his face. Celestial Venerable Chang knitted her brows and thought hard before shaking her head. Founding Emperor flicked his sword. A crisp and melodious sound rang out. He leisurely said, "The dead end following Divine Bridge. Celestial Palace Realm and Celestial Heavens Realm. Only Celestial Venerable you, after encountering the dead end of Divine Bridge Realm, had the thought of those two realms. But what if Divine Bridge Realm didn't exist?" Divine King Langwa blinked and looked at him curiously. Her heart was moved. Celestial Venerables Chang, Shao and Hao were moved even more. Far away, Qin Mu brought the Dragon Qilan and Yinri to avoid the torrents caused by the collision between Sword Path and Myriad Dao. When he heard Founding Emperor's words, his heart trembled greatly. He knew immediately why Founding Emperor said those words. What if Divine Bridge Realm didn't exist? Eternal Peace didn't have the Divine Bridge Realm. The people of Eternal Peace have replaced their Divine Bridge with Celestial River Divine Treasure. Celestial River Divine Treasure was created by Su Shanghua and Qin Mu, and it was mainstream in Eternal Peace. Founding Emperor left Carefree Village and traveled through Eternal Peace, and it was obvious that his experiences there moved him greatly, allowing him to once again to join the forefront of reformers. Qin Mu became excited. The reform of Eternal Peace had once came to a stop after opening Celestial River Divine Treasure, and never attempted to alter the cultivation system of Celestial Palaces. But now, Founding Emperor had taken that step, opening another path and continuing the reform. He really wanted to hear the opinion of this Grandmaster, and his explanation of the Tao realm. The so-called God realm is the Celestial Palace realm. The Celestial Palace is just a model copying Celestial Heavens, refining fake into real. Founding Emperor laughed and said, "What if Dragon Han Celestial Heaven is destroyed? If the real didn't exist, then how can the fake? Only the Tao is real, and therefore, there is only the Tao realm and no Celestial Palace realm." Presumptuous. Celestial Venerable Hao looked gloomy and said coldly, "Treacherous thoughts." Celestial Venerable Shao smiled and said, "Celestial Venerable Hao, it won't hurt to hear what he has to say." Founding Emperor said, "I have already sensed that there are 36 layers of the Tao realm, called the 36 Heavens. The highest layer is Sword Path Grand Overarching Heaven. Currently, I have already cultivated up to the 34th heaven." He glanced at Celestial Venerable Hao, then at Celestial Venerable Chang and Celestial Venerable Shao before shifting his gaze to Celestial Venerable Yin, who was hugging a white cat in the distance. He smiled slightly and said, "When I reach the 35th heaven, Celestial Venerable Hao, our cultivation and strength will be no different. When I reach Sword Path Grand Overarching Heaven, even if you complete Celestial Heavens, you won't be my match." He gently swung his sword. The blood that was once on the sword has now seeped into the ground, forming patches akin to plum blossoms. By that time, you 10 celestial venerables will witness a miracle that has never happened before. Founding Emperor smiled and said, a post-celestial lifeform will become an eternal ancient god of the sword path. There was a deafening silence. Celestial Venerable Shao suddenly said in a seemingly hoarse voice, you want to become another Grand Emperor, Sword Path Grand Emperor. Celestial Venerable Hao's mind quaked, and his eyes revealed his disbelief as his gaze landed upon Founding Emperor. Celestial Venerable Shao knew he said something he shouldn't have said, but his expression stayed unchanged. Founding Emperor was amazed and said, Grand Emperor? Grand Emperor has already reached this step? In that case, he is actually my Dao friend. Celestial Venerable Shao faintly smiled and said, I heard that Grand Emperor is dead but not gone completely because he had already cultivated to divine consciousness grand overarching heaven, allowing him to imprint his consciousness onto the supreme void forever. Qin Yi, you are also walking this path. However, what makes you more suited is that Grand Emperor's divine consciousness wasn't cultivated by himself, but was aided by the sacrificial offering of the Masters of Creation. His divine consciousness isn't pure, and can only be considered half a divine consciousness grand overarching heaven. He praised, if you achieve this step, you will be the first post-celestial existence ever to attain the Tao. I have met the Masters of Creation in the Great Void and traveled the Blood Rust Zone, so I know some of Grand Emperor's secrets. Celestial Venerable Hao's gaze flickered, but he did not say anything. Founding Emperor thoughts wandered off as he said, this Grand Emperor is worth meeting. However, before that, he gaze swept all around and said with a laugh, let us destroy celestial heaven. Breaking the gods within people's hearts is hard, but it's not hard to break celestial heavens. Far away, Qin Mu's expression changed slightly and solemnly said, go! Quickly leave celestial heavens. In Jade Capital, terrifying waves erupted. Founding Emperor, Celestial Venerable Hao, Celestial Venerable Shao, Divine King Langhua, and even Celestial Venerable Chong and Celestial Venerable Yan all attacked at the same time. At the same time, the sky became incomparably bright whilst the ground of celestial heavens seemed to have sunk into an incomparably dark night. Heaven Duke! Earth Count! Celestial Venerable Chong and Celestial Venerable Yan's hearts trembled. They stopped immediately and quickly mobilized their divine artifacts. Celestial Venerable Yu. Founding Emperor laughed loudly and unleashed his full power. Chapter 1139. Splitting Open Celestial Heavens. Celestial Venerable Chong and Celestial Venerable Yan were rather anxious. Even if Heaven Duke and Earth Count were bound by the great Tao of heaven and earth, the power they could unleash was still extraordinary. If they didn't mobilize divine artifacts Celestial Venerable Yu, they definitely wouldn't be able to contend at all. At the same time that Founding Emperor made his move, Divine King Langhua also made her move. Vast divine consciousness flooded over and instantly enveloped half of Jade Capital, causing it to enter the spacetime created by her divine consciousness. The left and right feathered forest guards, Divine Might, and Divine Strategy had just broken through the space created by Founding Emperor's sword when they landed in the boundless space and time visualized by her divine consciousness. They were unable to come aid in battle. The combat power of these 6 armies was no small matter. When they went out to battle, they could even suppress Emperor's throne practitioners. However, when faced with an existence on the level of a celestial venerable, they weren't enough. While Divine King Langhua was trapping the 6 Imperial Guards, Celestial Venerable Shao brazenly attacked her as the void beast leaked backwards into the void. Divine King Langhua's voice came from the depths of the void. Shao, as the disciple of Celestial Venerable Yun, you know too much about Grand Emperor, which makes me suspect your identity. Perhaps you are a family with Celestial Venerable Hao, and you are his father. Celestial Venerable Zhao's gaze flickered, and he also rushed into the void. Even though Celestial Venerable Hao's Tao heart was stable, he was stunned by her words. He was at a loss when facing Founding Emperor's sword and hurriedly avoided it. This was something that had never happened in hundreds of thousands of years. Ever since Celestial Venerable Yun died, he had never avoided anyone's moves. He had always been the god with the most dense cultivation and the most exquisite divine arts in this world. However, with his mind in rambles, he had no choice but to avoid Founding Emperor's sword to prevent himself from getting injured. Celestial Venerable Chong and Celestial Venerable Yan were also shocked. They looked at one another and were extremely wary of each other. How you people have already lost the courage to be pioneers. Founding Emperor was full of heroism as his sword pushed Celestial Venerable Hao back. His sword moves were endless like a torrent of sword chi and lightning crisscrossed in celestial heavens. The vast celestial heavens was like a colorful silk under his sword, and under the cutting of an artisan's shears, it started to split. Celestial Venerable Hao cannot endure anymore and stopped retreating. He drew a circle with his right hand, and a divine weapon suddenly appeared in his hand. In celestial heavens, everyone knew that Celestial Venerable Hao was proficient in divine arts, and always had a distaste for divine weapons, let alone use one. However, no one knew how much he had hidden. Back then, there were 3 people who had ransacked ancient god Celestial Emperor's Clear Sun Hall. One was Celestial Venerable Yuan, one was Qin Mu, and the other was him. The 3 of them split the treasures that the ancient god Celestial Emperor had obtained in ancestral court. Of all the treasures Celestial Venerable Hao had stolen, he gave Jade Pillar over to Tao Ancestor. It was used to create the Jade Pillar of Guardian Pavilion. A Tai Sui too was also placed in Divine Creation Artifact to aid in the construction of divine artifacts Celestial Venerable Yu, but also the divine weapons of the ancient gods for emperors. However, he kept all the other treasures and secretly forged them into his own divine weapons. At this moment, his right hand drew a circle, and divine weapon appeared that resembled a circular plate. However, the plate immediately split apart, and with a clanging sound, the 36 Great Tao of Yuandu appeared, constructing the primordial realm in its most oldest form. They were the 36 divine weapons: dragon, phoenixes, mountains, lake, river, hill, creek, cauldron, pagoda, and other divine weapons of all shapes and sizes. The power of each of these divine weapons was incomparably tyrannical, and they radiated boundless Tao might. One of them could suppress an entire world. A divine weapon forged from the most powerful treasure of ancestral court was bound to be extraordinary. The plate splits out again, and with a few clangs, the 49 heavenly Tao appeared. They were also in the form of the 49 heavenly Tao treasures. Outline for umbrella, abyss 5, pit, rope, bamboo, palace, gate, well, and so on. The plate splits once more and formed the great Tao of Yudu outside the heavenly Tao. The 64 divine weapons of Yudu Great Tao were talisman, ship, mask, whip, horn, eye, kue 6, mountain pass, lantern, fire, and so on. They were all different. The plate split yet again, forming the various stars and constellations in the sky. It was even more complicated and its power was even stronger. This was his myriad Tao heavenly wheel. As founding Emperor's sword stabbed and Celestial Venerable Hao blocked with his hand, terrifying quakes instantly attacked the entire celestial heavens. At this time, Qin Mu and the rest had already rushed out of Southern Heavenly Gate and were far away from celestial heavens. Suddenly, a terrifying vibration came from heaven and earth and reached their ears. But the sound came from their Tao hearts, as though something collapsed within. Qin Mu suddenly turned his head back and instantly saw a breathtaking sight. In celestial heavens, incomparably brilliant rays of light rose from the numinous sky-treasured hall, like a multicolored sunrise. At the same time, gorgeous and vibrant rays of light rose from below celestial heavens. The range of the multicolored lights grew longer and longer. With numinous sky-treasured hall as the center, it spread towards Eastern Heavenly Gate and Western Heavenly Gate. Not only that, at the place where the light have reached, celestial heavens gave off a world-shaking rumble. The divine palaces and halls have split into 2, one after another. Qin Mu's scalp turned numb when he saw this. This fissure would soon spread to Western Heavenly Gate and Eastern Heaven Gate. At that time, celestial heavens would be completely split into 2. The speed at which the multicolored light spread was extremely fast, and it was becoming quicker and quicker. Finally, Western Heavenly Gate shook, and with a loud crack it split open. The multicolored lights arrived at Eastern Heavenly Gate. Right as Eastern Heavenly Gate rumbled and was about to split apart, Celestial Venerable Hao suddenly appeared, and with a shout, obstructed the splitting of Eastern Heavenly Gate. Even so, all the gods in the world who had cultivated to God realm and opened their celestial palaces felt a world-shaking tremor in their minds as though something had split open. Almost simultaneously, they raised their head and looked towards the direction of celestial heavens. Some gods didn't know where celestial heavens was, but they all looked towards that direction. That was because the sound in their head was coming from the direction of celestial heavens. This loud sound didn't just enter their minds, but it also entered their Tao hearts, as though their Tao hearts had split open. The current celestial heavens was like an open mouth that gave people an incomparably absurd feeling. Celestial heavens that represented Celestial Emperor's supreme authority had actually split apart just like that. Founding Emperor laughed loudly and transformed into a sword light escaping far away. His voice came from afar. Celestial Venerable Hao, today's destruction of celestial heavens was all thanks to your help. I'll visit you again another day. Celestial Venerable Hao's paused, and he controlled the myriad Tao heavenly wheel to chase after him. Meanwhile, Celestial Venerable Shao shouted, "Heavenly ladies, quickly stabilize celestial heavens. Don't let it continue to split. Otherwise, Ancestral Court will appear." Celestial Venerable Chong and Celestial Venerable Yan's expressions changed slightly. They hurriedly flew over and worked together to stop celestial heavens from splitting. Celestial Venerable Shao quickly melted the broken sides of celestial heavens, trying to fuse them together. However, even with his remarkable abilities, it was very difficult for him to restore the celestial heavens to its previous state. After he repaired celestial heavens, he saw a huge scar in the sky that looked akin the wound on celestial heavens. Outside celestial heavens, Qin Mu's heart throbbed. Without a basis, he intuitively felt that the seal of the Ancestral Court had come loosened. In the depths of the universe, a boundless tremor traveled here, and a rift suddenly appeared in the darkness. Chapter 1140 Opening Ancestral Court. Ancestral Court. Vast and boundless, with ancient divine mountains and treasures scattered everywhere. Any random item is sufficient to make the outside world lose its mind, yet this place is extremely desolate. There were only huge void beasts lurking about in this ancient and primordial world, residing, reproducing, killing, and devouring everything in sight. On this day, all the void beasts suddenly sensed something within their hearts and raised their heads to look towards the sky. A crack has formed in the sky. Meanwhile, in the 19th void, the void beast mother opened her eyes to gaze at the crack in the sky. Besides her were densely packed with an absurd amount of void beast eggs, numbering in the 10 millions, which filled the entire 19th void. Sha 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 dash. The bones of the void beast mother trembled while countless void beasts became excited. They rose into the sky and rushed towards the crack. The crack grew larger and larger until it stopped after reaching a certain size. From Ancestral Court, it was now possible to see the bright starry sky and the vibrant world outside. Like a swarm of locusts, the densely packed void beasts flew towards the crack. A soul-stirring roar came from their mouth. As the first void beast rushed into the crack and tried to fly out of Ancestral Court, its corporeal body suddenly exploded and its flesh melted. In a frenzy, more and more void beasts threw themselves into the crack. Their bodies bloomed one by one into beautiful flowers made of blood, creating a gorgeous sight. In just a short moment, tens of thousands of void beasts have already died in the crack. Their blood dyed the crack scarlet. From outside, Ancestral Court seemed like a bloody wound inflicted onto the universe. Suddenly, from the depth of the void beast mother let out a low and powerful roar. The other void beasts stopped rushing into the crack and instead sprawled around it, pushing the crack wider with their muscles and claws. However, this seal was made by the ancient gods gathering all their powers back in the Antiquity era. It used the backsides of each world as the seal and wasn't something that can be broken by them. In Celestial Heavens, Celestial Venerable Zhao's face sunk. Celestial Heavens was an integral part in sealing Ancestral Court. With only him alone, he cannot complete the seal again, especially when many ancient gods were now dead or injured. Even if this wasn't the case, Heaven Duke and Earth Count would not work together with him again. With the loosening of Ancestral Court's seal, there was no possibility of fixing it anymore. The only thing he can do is to prevent the damage spreading further. However, if Ancestral Court's seal was broken, the people of the world would naturally discover its location, and this buried history would gradually surface in the eyes of the people. Other than its history, there's also a great terror. One that can destroy the world. I'm afraid it will leak out from Ancestral Court, he thought to himself. Almost simultaneously in the Great Void, Celestial Heaven's army of gods and devils also felt that peculiar rumble. The marching army who were preparing to attack the Great Void turned their heads to look towards celestial heavens. It is impossible to see celestial heavens from the Great Void, but they can feel it. Celestial Venerable Hong's heart stirred slightly, showing a slight smile. He said solemnly, "Celestial heavens changed. Everyone, this must be caused by founding emperor's rebellious attack against celestial heavens, not to be left unchecked. I'll head back and take a look." God Emperor Lang Xian, Divine King Zhu, and the rest couldn't help but be astonished. The celestial venerables who were most proactive in attacking the Great Void, apart from Celestial Venerable Hua, was Celestial Venerable Hong. And yet, why was Celestial Venerable Hong so eager to rush back now that they were in the Great Void? Celestial Venerable Gong said indifferently, "I'll return as well. Dao friend Hong, let's go together." Celestial Venerable Hong's expression changed slightly. He was not willing to travel together with her. He laughed dryly and suddenly escaped, becoming a beam of light. Celestial Venerable Gong transformed into a rainbow and followed closely behind. God Emperor Lang Xian, Divine King Zhu, Celestial Venerable Su, Celestial Venerable Hua, and the rest looked at each other. God Emperor Lang Xian coughed and said with a smile, "Dao friend Hong and Dao friend Gong have always been on bad terms with each other. When I first met them, it was when Dao friend Gong was beating Dao friend Hong up badly. If they go together, some trouble might occur on the way. I'll go to help smooth things out between them." After saying that, he also left. Divine King Zhu hurriedly shouted, "They don't even recognize their own families once they start fighting. If it's only Dao friend Lang Shuang, I'm afraid he cannot stop them. I'll go and help." Celestial Venerable Su frowned and looked towards Celestial Venerable Hua. Celestial Venerable Hong and Celestial Venerable Gong have mysterious origins, whilst Lang Xian and Divine King Zhu have ancient origins, existing since the ancient primordial era and have survived until now. The four of them left because they know many secrets. Celestial Venerable Qin is definitely not the only one who attacks celestial heavens. Celestial Venerable Hua, why did you not choose to return? Celestial Venerable Hua said gently, "If you don't leave, how can I leave?" Celestial Venerable Su said coldly, "I have no interest in you." Celestial Venerable Hua walked side by side with her and said with a smile, "Among the 10 celestial venerables of celestial heavens, the only pure celestial venerables are you and I. Grand Emperor and Celestial Emperor are hidden among them, with other ancient life forms hidden about. It is hard to distinguish who is truthful and who is deceitful. If you and I become allies, we can advantage and retreat together, increasing our chances at victory." Celestial Venerable Su stopped her footsteps and replied with a smile that wasn't a smile. "Celestial Venerable Hua, aren't you always a part of Celestial Venerable Hua's faction? Aren't you afraid that Celestial Venerable Hua will know about your words?" With a stern face, Celestial Venerable Hua said, "I admire you. If we can get along, Celestial Venerable will only think more highly of me. Even if you're half god, you're still half human." Celestial Venerable Su sneered and continued to move forward. "I'm a half god. What I don't understand is that you're clearly a human celestial venerable, yet you are more concerned about stifling the human race's power more than anyone else. Those years when you besieged Celestial Venerable Yun, when you killed Light Emperor, you also sent your main troops. When you killed Celestial Venerable Yu and Celestial Venerable Ling, when you eliminated High Emperor, you were also at the forefront. Against your own race, you have been too harsh." Celestial Venerable Hua had a solemn expression as he said in a sunken voice, "For the future of the human race, I had no choice but to take action. They are incapable of revolting against celestial heavens, against ancient gods, against the great Tao of heaven and earth. They struggled for the lives of the human race, when in reality it is impossible. It is impossible for the human race to win. They have to submit to stronger power to survive." He looked into the distance with a deep gaze. For their own selfishness, they wanted to sacrifice the lives of our entire human race. I've asked the people under my jurisdiction, and everyone is living very well. No one wants to revolt. People who walk different paths cannot work together. Even if it's a precious friend of the past, I won't show mercy and let them trample on my human race." Celestial Venerable Su shot a glance at him and said, "And that's why you are also concerned about the trip to the Great Void. You are the first to come in order to kill Celestial Venerable Qin and exterminate Carefree Village. Flames cracked behind Celestial Venerable Hua's head, turning into a wheel of light. He is fishing for fame. I cannot let him drag my human race into the land of eternal damnation. If he joins forces with the ancient gods, it's destined to be a path of no return. He will only become a dog raised by the ancient gods. If he manages to succeed, the human race will become dogs like him. They will not be able to live their current lives. I have tried to convince him, but he's too stubborn. If that's the case, let me end his sinful life so that he can't make any more mistakes. Celestial Venerable Su couldn't resist asking. What about Celestial Venerable Mu? Celestial Venerable Hua was puzzled. Back then, when Celestial Venerable Mu went to the celestial heavens, there were 3 Celestial Venerables protecting him in Jade Pool. You were one of them, right? Celestial Venerable Su sneered and said, You are also two-faced. You say one thing, yet you mean another. Celestial Venerable Hua shook his head and said, You're wrong. Among the 10 Celestial Venerables, I disdain him the most. I can't even tolerate a speck of his existence. He clasped his hands behind his back. Celestial Venerable Mu is even more of a troublemaker than Qin Yi. His words and actions are far more bewitching. If he continues, the human race would be doomed. For the future of the human race, I will naturally be the first to kill him. Furthermore, Hao and I are friends, why would I betray Hao to save him? I wasn't among the 3 Celestial Venerables that saved him that day. Shaking his head, he continued. If the human race wants to survive, we have to eradicate these rebels and traitors, not leaving a single one alive. My heart aches every time I see those people of eternal peace being bewitched by these rebels. Isn't it good to just be alive? Such a pity, I had a chance to kill him in the Great Void, but I was muddle-headed for a moment. It was because he had saved me that I could escape from the Supreme Divine Consciousness domain 200 years ago, and so I didn't kill him. He said indifferently. However, at South Extremities, he committed a heinous crime and severed ties with me. I won't have such worries the next time I kill him. Your heart is in good faith, but you are too harsh on your own race, Celestial Venerable Su said with a smile. Suddenly, her expression changed, and she raised her hand to stop the army of celestial heavens. She sneered and said, You actually built you to here. How impudent, a brat dares to be Earth Count here. Where's your respect? Come out.